Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, March 7th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, 2 guests, a doubleheader. Juan Cole, professor, academic, legend in Middle Eastern studies, author of Muhammad, Prophet of Peace. We're talking about the state of the Israeli elections, the Netanyahu indictment, the smears against Ilhan Omar, and the pushback. And then the great Meagan Day, Jacobin magazine. She was at the Bernie launch. We're talking about Bernie Sanders 2020 and class warfare. That's what it is.
Pew, 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 pew.
Exactly. Democrats put off their smear Ilhan Omar resolution because of grassroots pushback, although Rahm Emanuel has opened his mouth to slander her, and I would just like to take this time to remind everybody that Rahm Emanuel helped cover up the murder of a child by a Chicago PD officer who's now in jail. So, look, Rahm can say what he likes, and I can too, and that will be the only thing I say about Rahm Emanuel. Bernie Sanders comes to the unequivocal defense of Ilhan Omar and open discourse. Elizabeth Warren, far more vague. And Kamala Harris, somewhere in the middle. Better than Warren, not as good as Bernie. Teenager killed by Israeli sniper in Gaza as investigations move forward on crimes committed against Gazan protesters. The Democratic National Committee rejects Fox News for debates, citing the New Yorker article, which I guess is just formalizing what we already know, which is that Fox is functionally a state propaganda network.
It's actually an insult to state propaganda networks.
It is. I have to say, as someone who studied in Turkey, the state propaganda looks a lot cooler there. Trump just made sure you won't hear about how many civilians are killed in drone strikes. They're even higher than under the Obama era. And in a blow to conservatives, the National Business Group is staying out of a Wisconsin Supreme Court race. And Senator McSally, former Air Force pilot, says a superior officer raped her in her time in the Air Force. The U.S. government contradicts Homeland Security Secretary Bridget Nielsen, admits that 471 migrant parents have faced deportations. And the Congressman Ro Khanna suggests the Democratic Party should oppose all large-scale sanctions against Venezuela, and over 30 congresspeople finally signed a letter decrying Jair Bolsonaro's assault on rights in Brazil, and note that Lula, the most important politician of the country, was barred from running in what they call questionable circumstances. We're going to get to that in a second. But first, Donald Trump has really been on a pretty steady comedic decline since being elected president. The only thing he's really good at in life is inheriting money and dunking on Republicans and being a messy bastard.
Work in the press.
But I mean, look, I guess if you want, some people might get sensitive to this because this is definitely a guy's just brain in pure decline here. But this was funny from yesterday. This is Donald Trump with Tim Cook was at a table with Bolsonaro a couple of weeks ago in Davos. So the Apple CEO, very comfortable consorting with fascists. Here he is meeting with the clown fascist in chief, Donald Trump.
I used to say, Tim, you got to start doing it over here, and you really have. I mean, you've really put a big investment in our country. We appreciate it very much, Tim Apple. But we're...
That's also not true. Of course, Apple still is hiding a massive amount of assets in overseas tax shelters and using sweatshop labor in their hardware and manufacturing. But let's just play that one more time.
Put a big investment in our country. We appreciate it very much, Tim Apple. But
Jeff Amazon sent naked pictures of himself. It was sad.
Bill Windows. I don't really like that guy.
Bill Windows, great guy.
I want that to be purposeful shade. It's probably not, though.
No way.
That's the milk people are in my brain.
If you could abstract away from all the bad outcomes, Trump is, without question, the funniest president we've ever had.
Oh, yeah, Obama never did so. Obama's just like, yeah, Tim Apple's here, whatever.
I think JFK or Lincoln are also very funny.
JFK actually would do the like, Tim Apple's here.
JFK,
like he would do the shade.
JFK was talking to Eisenhower during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Eisenhower says, like, I don't think that'll make them shoot them off. And they talk about nuclear missiles. Jesus. And JFK's like, oh, God.
Yeah. Oh, God. No,
Wow.
JFK, I don't want to get into the whole JFK debate, but one thing that you just cannot deny is that the man had very well-developed sense of irony. In that speech at American University, which is, who knows? Maybe he would have followed up with policy. We don't know because he was assassinated. But where he gave like the basically a call for like really de-escalating the Cold War and pointing towards disarmament and talking about how like 70% of our body is water and we all share that same water and the ocean. I mean, it is a great speech taken in its own terms. And the thing, though, it's funny in the beginning. It's a funny piece of historical kind of trivia. But Robert Byrd is there, the senator who died, only a couple years ago, and he's already a senator. And Robert Byrd, another extremely complicated figure, and in many ways a bad figure, but in other ways a very admirable figure, who did apologize forthrightly for his badness. But at any rate, he was a poor guy from West Virginia, so he was getting his degree at night school from American University. And Kennedy said, like, I have a former colleague who's here, who's receiving his degree after working nights for several years. I'll be getting the same degree in 2 hours. It was just like the type of joke that you would do today. It was very interesting because you see, like, we talk about how comedy dates itself quickly, and JFK's like the president. And his like sense of irony and sensibility, it's like you look at Reagan, and there is something like, what was going on in the 80s that people thought this was so amazing? And then you look back at Kennedy, and you're like, yeah, it makes sense.
I mean, relative to previous presidents.
Yeah, just on a cultural level.
I also like the stories about LBJ's hog.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, LBJ is hilarious in entirely different ways.
And I mean, my God, well, again, I'm erasing a lot of history here, but if not for Vietnam, the guy would be looked on pretty fondly. I think there's something about like there hasn't been like an SOB who was like occasionally on the right side in like quite some time. Like a guy like just like stories of him like terrorizing segregationist senators. There's something like very satisfying about that.
The image of the hamburgers will live in our minds forever.
Yeah,
That's
Trump
right.
gave us hamburgers.
Never forget.
Which I think we undercovered on this show.
Yeah, we did undercover on this show.
No, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. So let's start actually with this. We're going to get to the other clown fascist who completely humiliated himself, Jair Bolsonaro, in the fun half because he tweeted something out about Carnival. Let's start. We'll bridge this segment together. We'll get to Carnival in a second. This is really important, and I will say in generalities that people, particularly with TMBS, but obviously also this show, we're part of the context of helping make this letter happen, is how I'll put it. And about 30 members of Congress spearheaded by Congresswoman Susan Wild, who's a really good labor-oriented congresswoman out of Pennsylvania, and also co-led by Ro Khanna. And maybe let's just run down some of the other names on the list. Of course, Ilhan Omar is there, Jamie Raskin, Bobby Rush, Adriano Espaillat. Ro Khanna was the other lead on it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Deb Haaland, Jose Serrano, Frank Pallone Jr., but also Charlie Crist, as an example, Mark Pocan, James McGovern, Alan Lowenthal, and others. So these are people you should look at the letter and make sure that you thank them. And they have signed a letter written to Mike Pompeo. And again, this is the type of thing that will register in Brazil. It's going to make no difference, obviously, to current U.S. policy, but this is a big deal in Brazil. And I'll read just briefly, I'll read the first two graphs, and then it goes into detail on the abuse of the LGBTQ community under Bolsonaro, the assault on indigenous people, as well as the assault on labor and pensions. Dear Secretary Pompeo, we're writing to urge you to publicly emphasize the importance of defending the human rights of the people of Brazil. Since the election of far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro as president, we have been particularly alarmed by Bolsonaro's threat poses to the LGBTQ community and other minority communities, women, labor activists, and other political dissidents in Brazil. We are deeply concerned that by targeting hard-won political and social rights, Bolsonaro is endangering Brazil's long-term democratic future. As a still developing democracy, Brazil must be particularly vigilant in protecting its institutions and ensuring the separations of power in the country. Even before Bolsonaro took office, the regressive trends pushing against Brazil's democracy were clear. It should concern all who are committed to Brazilian democracy that Bolsonaro was elected after former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, widely acknowledged as the most popular leader in Brazil, as the most popular political leader in Brazil, was barred from running in controversial circumstances that put to risk the right of the people of Brazil to freely choose their president. Of course, the next letter must be stronger. Zero evidence, and he is in fact the world's most prominent political prisoner. And there's some new stories about that case. Again, zero material evidence. He's literally jailed for indeterminate acts. The second sentence he was just hit with, a forensic analysis showed that the judge copied and pasted part of the first sentence into the second sentence. And there's another story that might be coming out, I can't comment on yet, that will blow a whole other hole into Judge Sergio Moro's case. Carnival is a site of resistance in the Caribbean, and it was no different at this year's Brazilian Carnival, which is part of the freakout of the bizarre Brazilian president. This is a report from Michael Fox for the World News Network about resistance and Lula Livre at Brazil Carnival.
Brazilians are in the streets for Carnival, millions across the country. And for many of them, it's an act of resistance. Supporters of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva have formed free Lula samba groups around the country, like this one in Florianópolis. They've been practicing for several weeks. They took to city streets over the weekend.
We are here today with everyone who wants to combat fascism in Brazil. This is a political act to combat Lula's unjust imprisonment and transforming Carnival into a big grassroots action against this.
Former President Lula has been in prison since last April. He was convicted of accepting a beachside apartment from a company seeking government contracts, but the ruling was based on plea bargain testimony. No evidence was ever found. His jailer, Judge Sergio Moro, is now President Jair Bolsonaro's justice minister. Lula supporters say his imprisonment was just a move to block him from running in last year's elections.
Today, the greatest grassroots leader that we've ever had is unjustly imprisoned, accused of crimes that he didn't commit and for which there is no proof. And we need to agitate so we can get him out of prison, so he can be free.
They've also removed protection for the Amazon and indigenous people, which is an almost genocidal threat to those communities in Brazil and a threat to the entire global ecosystem, although leaders in Bolsonaro's new government have called things like global warming a cultural and Marxist plot. They also have an advisor who's a Brazilian who lives in the state of Virginia, who's a fascist that does astrology consults, who recently was actually asking on social media for money to help get health coverage. the ironies and disgustingness of these people abound. Lula lifted Bolsonaro. Lula lifted 40 million people out of poverty, and he and the Workers' Party helped transition Brazil out of a military dictatorship in the 1980s. So thank all of the Congress people, particularly Congresswoman Susan Wild and Ro Khanna, but also AOC, Jamie Raskin, Jim McGovern, Adriano Espaillat, Bobby Rush. I'll be tweeting this out again. And Premila Jaipal, Jesus Chuy Garcia, Peter Welch, and Jane Schakowsky, Rosa DeLauro, and several others. They need to be thanked, and they should be pushed to do further letters, maybe even a resolution in the House condemning the political imprisonment of Lula and the cancellation of democracy and rise of fascism in Brazil. And also, if your congressman didn't sign it, your congressperson didn't sign it, call them and ask them why not. All right, today's show, if I can find this. I know Sam usually loves to read these because it's the New Yorker. He gets all excited. The New Yorker is sponsoring my show. Do you see, Dad? The New Yorker represents the best writing in America today, both online and in print. The New Yorker covers a full range of topic, including politics, news, international affairs, climate change, popular culture, the arts, fiction, food, humor, and cartoons. Not to mention, the New Yorker touches on subjects that many people may not have previously put much thought into, like the world's diminishing supply of sand, paper jams, stink bugs, and hunting down heirloom tomatoes. Some of the New Yorker's incredible writers include contributors like Ronan Farrow, who's written breaking news stories on Harvey Weinstein, Les Moonves, and many a Brett Kavanaugh, along with Jane Mayer. The new Jane Mayer piece on just how specifically Fox News functions as a propaganda network. All incredible reporting. And Helen Rosner, a James Beard Award-winning food writer who contributes essays and reports stories on all things gastronomic. I keep up with the New Yorker. I read the New Yorker regularly. You're still going to get incredible deep dives. The piece that I did last year on this show on how the Tory PR firm Bell Pottinger worked with the Zuma government to create a fake populist campaign in the service of foreign direct investment and to distract from corruption scandals in South Africa is one of the great pieces, one of the in-depth, deeply reported pieces that you expect from the New Yorker, along with really good columns and broad art coverage. I read every issue. And now our listeners can save 50% and get 12 weeks off the New Yorker for just $6 when you go to thenewyorker.com/majority and enter majority. You'll get an exclusive tote as well as unlimited access to the New Yorker app, online archive, crossword puzzle, and newyorker.com with between 10 and 15 exclusive site-only stories every day. That's newyorker.com/majority. Enter majority. We are going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Professor Juan Cole. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks at the helm here. Joining us now is the legendary proprietor of the Informed Comment blog. He also teaches history at the University of Michigan and is the author most recently of Muhammad, Prophet of Peace. Professor Juan Cole, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Professor Cole, let's start with Israel. What's actually happening there? An election has been called. A sitting prime minister has been indicted. A left-wing party has been banned from running, even as even further far-right extremist and overtly racist parties enter the political process. What's your kind of broad read on the electoral landscape of Israel right now?
Well, Israel, for the past couple of decades, has been trending not just right, but really far right in its politics. And, you know, in some ways, some of these trends are similar to what's happened in the United States. There's enormous increase in inequality. A handful of billionaires really are running the show. It's getting hard for ordinary people to pay their rent in places like Tel Aviv. And then on top of everything else, you have a severe racial divide in Israel between Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Israelis. About, close to 25% of Israel is probably of Palestinian heritage. Often you see a statistic of 20%, but in any case it's very significant. And their party, the party that tends to represent them, Byrd, which has also Jewish Israeli supporters, as you say, is a far left party. And it has just been banned from running by people like Avigdor Lieberman, the former Israeli defense minister, on the grounds that it's insufficiently loyal to Israel. That is to say that it's largely supported by the Palestinian Israelis. So this will be overturned by the Supreme Court. But the Palestinian Israelis really are increasingly checking out of the Israeli political elections, and this will probably also further hurt their turnout, which is what Lieberman wants. So it's a little bit like voter suppression in the United States, where laws are passed like ID laws and so forth to keep African Americans from voting. In Israel, the right has the luxury of just announcing it's not going to let their party run at all.
Now, some people who will defend the kind of resiliency of Israeli institutions, and look, I don't really see a contradiction between acknowledging sort of three things: that there's an occupation, there's a siege on Gaza. Those are both unspeakable violations of every kind of principle that you would hold if you had even just kind of basic democratic and liberal values. Then there's the the growth of Israel as an extreme far right state in the last decade even. And then there's the fact that there are still some mechanisms, certainly of democracy, that work, I guess, in some ways, and applied to specific things robustly. So how do you kind of balance out that calculation in terms of how to read and understand exactly what Israel is as a state, embodying all of these contradictions?
Sure. Well, as you say, things are on a spectrum. Within Israel proper, there are regular elections, and however, there's increasing signs of them not being entirely on the up and up. So I would say that, Freedom House has those three categories of not free, partially free, and free. And Israel is only partially free for many reasons. One is, again, these steps that are taken to limit the franchise of the Palestinian Israelis. But also within the Jewish Israeli majority, the corruption charges against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are not, in my view, just corruption. They're about the destruction of democracy. It's far beyond monetary corruption. he is charged with taking gifts from rich people to do them favors, which is ordinary everyday corruption that happens everywhere. But in addition to that, the casino mogul Sheldon Adelson in the United States started a newspaper in Israel, which is a cheerleading instrument for Netanyahu himself, and gave it away for free. You could just get it on the street corner and just pick it up for free. And it's a full newspaper. It has a staff. It does reporting, and so it was competing with real newspapers that were founded just to do news and not just to support Netanyahu. And Netanyahu is accused of going to one of the real newspapers and saying, look, I know your business is being hurt by this free rag we're giving out. We can print more of it or we can print less of it. If you're nice to me, we'll print less of it. So, right. Netanyahu is accused of shaping the reporting on him in the national press by blackmailing the newspapers with bankruptcy and using Sheldon Adelson's casinos as a piggy bank, essentially for his muscling of these newspapers. And there's more of that kind of blackmail and pressure put on these newspapers, because the government is in charge of licensing and so forth. So, I mean, they're calling it corruption charges, but they're really dictator charges.
Yeah, so that's right. That's really important. And I'd like you to actually compare and contrast. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was released from prison about a year ago on corruption charges. Olmert is certainly a much more charismatic and appealing personality than Netanyahu. He certainly presided over his own great crimes against Gaza and Lebanon as prime minister, but he also recognized rhetorically, and if you believe in a two-state solution framework, he certainly put on the table the most substantive offer of an actual two-state solution to the Palestinian leadership. And he suggests, he had a funny line that he felt bad for Netanyahu because of his delicate mental state, which was a funny sort of like he still knows how to throw a jab. But his claim is actually that the corruption charges that took him down, which were purely of the money in a shoebox to do a favor variety, were actually spearheaded by Sheldon Adelson and far-right forces in the United States because he was willing to buck the extreme right in Israel. So, maybe he's just justifying himself, but can you kind of compare and contrast the Olmert saga, where this guy actually did go to jail, and then the actual the much larger stakes of what Netanyahu is accused of, and then Olmert's claim that he essentially was corruption charges were the engine to move him out of the picture because he wasn't appeasing not only the Israeli far right, but he actually really points the finger at the American far right, which is fascinating.
Oh, sure. Well, the American far right is extremely influential in Israel, and indeed, now there's this big issue over AIPAC and its lobbying and giving campaign or directing campaign monies, directing other organizations to give campaign monies to American politicians to get them loyal to Israel. And the fact is that AIPAC doesn't represent, the American Jewish community. The American Jewish community leans left. 70% of them vote Democrat. The AIPAC represents a handful of extremely wealthy, very far right-wing Jews, and cooperates then with the right-wing evangelicals to generate messages to Congress and to the media and so forth. So the fact that the mechanisms for the Israel lobbies are in the hands of a right-wing group in the United States then has this enormous impact on Israel itself. I think that Olmert is just corrupt. He was taking money from, as you say, for favors, even going back apparently to when he was mayor of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And I think the Israeli Israeli police are some of the last uncorrupted institutions in Israel in this regard, and they really are willing to indict a prime minister, which, as you suggested, it shows that Israeli democracy is not completely gone. And the fact that the Attorney General, who was appointed by Netanyahu, is willing to go forward with these charges against him is also a sign of the continued robustness of elements of Israeli democracy. But there are starting to be, as I said, these severe constraints on it that between the manipulation of the press and of press licenses and the corruption and the disenfranchisement of large numbers of voters and then the ongoing occupation. I mean, this is a very complex situation, and just calling it a democracy would be a misnomer.
How does this play out in the sense that, again, Olmert, I'll just, referring to him, he quite confidently predicted that Netanyahu will lose the election. He said that, parties from the center-right through the left have been asking him for advice, which I guess is probably his stand-in for being sensible. But you could have a situation where it seems to me just as likely, if not more likely, that another even more extreme far-right coalition wins. Netanyahu's return to power with these dictatorial aspirations, and his response to these charges so far, in my read, has not been to deny them. I mean, he has denied them, but he's almost been asking for them to be crushed in an extrajudicial sort of process. I mean, how do you see that dynamic playing out?
Right. Well, with regard to the upcoming election, the polling suggests that Netanyahu's right-wing coalition will get 61 seats, which is a bare majority, and that Likud will be the largest party in the coalition, and that would mean that Netanyahu gets another term as prime minister. 61 is a very slim margin in a parliament of 120. And whether the far right will get that many is of course impossible to actually predict. And so there's uncertainty about this. There is a strong center-right tendency, which is offsetting the far right to some extent. But it's been pointed out by my colleague Mark Tessler that in the last few elections, a center-right always emerges and does relatively well, but then withers on the vine after the election and doesn't quite get to a majority. There's kind of now, some of these things are ethnic, but there's kind of a constituency for the far right of various sorts: the ultra-Orthodox, the Eastern European and Russian immigrants, the Mizrahim, or the Jews originally from the Middle East itself. Mm-hmm. All of them tend to relatively far-right politics. So it's hard for the center-right to win.
What is the center-right now? Is Labor considered center-right now? Are we talking about Yair Lapid's party? What would be center-right now?
Yes. I'm calling Gantz and Yair Lapid as center-right. And I think it's in Israel they're called centrists, but I think they in American terms they would be center-right, or in European ones. Right. No, Labor is on the left, but Labor is a shadow of its former self. It doesn't amount to much.
Right. And then and what about Meretz? That would be the only.
That's
they're
done.
Yeah.
They're done. They're
okay.
Done. I met Shulamit Aloni years ago, and we got along fine. And I was joking with Israeli colleagues years later that if I were in Israel, since I liked Shulamit, maybe I'd vote for Meretz. But these were Israeli lefties, so they called me a running dog capitalist and imperialist for that. But Meretz, which is center left, those parties really just aren't able to get significant
representation.
That's important to
Knesset
underline,
anymore.
right? Because Meretz is by Americans. I would deem labor to me is definitely in very much the center, as it were, and particularly with regards to things like the occupation. But Meretz, could be fairly deemed, I agree with you, a center-left party. And in the current Israeli context, I mean, they might as well be communists who want to live in one state. I mean, that's how far the pendulum has swung to the far right in Israel.
Yes. Oh, well, absolutely. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you measure these things. If you're looking at issues in wealth distribution, which is traditionally the way you judge whether something is left or right, then labor is left. They support labor unions and things, but which Likud does not. But if you get outside of internal Israeli politics and look at issues of occupation, well, labor engineered the occupation, so there's not that much difference between them and the right on that issue.
Ilhan Omar has been speaking out on this. So, what's your read on that?
Yeah. Well, before we move to that,
please.
we should just mention briefly that one of the ways that Netanyahu hopes to get his 61 seats and a majority in the new parliament is that he's encouraged one of his coalition allies to bring on board a terrorist organization.
Yes.
The Otzma Yehudit, the Jewish power faction of Kahanists, who, various forms of Kahanism, going back to Rabbi Meir Kahana, have been termed terrorists by the U.S. State Department, by the Israeli government banned them from running for office. Some of their members celebrate the massacre at the Tomb of the Patriarchs in 1994 by Baruch Goldstein, who shot down 28 innocent civilians, and a little bit the way that the Trump machine has, authorized support by the white supremacists in order to get a margin over the Democrats. So Netanyahu has authorized this coalition with the Kahanists. And one of their leaders who couldn't get into the United States for being considered a terrorist or a member of a terrorist organization has just been allowed to run by the Election Commission, which is controlled by the Likud, the ruling far right-wing party. So this is a very distressing development. Israeli politics is far right, but these people are crazy, and even the American Israel lobbies are upset, and I think they're afraid that this is increasingly a hard sell to the American public.
Right. And this is the other, actually, maybe we should put this on the table too. I mean, this is the thing that when leaders, again, like an Ehud Barak or an Ehud Olmert, would talk about the need to end, they meant it in different ways, but some form of ending the occupation, having a two-state solution, they would couch it, and they used the word apartheid before anybody else. A lot of they would couch it in those terms. They would say, look, American Jews, by and large, are, frankly, pretty liberal. They care about things like civil rights, and this just isn't tenable. But the new Israeli leadership has clearly made the calculation that, first of all, there's plenty, there's an extreme far right that opposes civil rights in the United States. There's resurgent neo-fascists in Europe, and then there's governments that you can do business with that don't even have, of course, in the United States case, it's obviously hypocritical and contradictory, but as an example, in China or Russia or something, there isn't even a kind of pretend human rights discourse. So you can just, go about your business. And if the liberals don't like you anymore, then, so be it. Seems to be the calculation.
That's right. Well, I think the calculation is that wealthy far-right billionaires are the ones you need to please, and they don't care about things like occupation. In fact, they're looking for ways to profit from it.
Right. Right, and so that's how this, and so in the context, this emerges Ilhan Omar, basically saying, and I think, look, I'll just stipulate, I've kind of removed the nuance in my analysis because I think there are times and places for things, and I think that there was a time when maybe you could have a carefully calibrated conversation where calling her anti-Semitic or calling her into question for criticizing Israel is wrong, flat out wrong. It's a smear. It's dishonest. It's disgusting. And then you could say some of her language, particularly actually language that she used. The only one that's been identified to me was the "hypnotize the world" tweet from 2012. And I think, yes, that's legitimately ill-considered and just strategically don't do that. But we're at a point now where a sitting congresswoman has had a target put on her back in an act of political terrorism to keep her from speaking honestly and freely on the conduct of a sovereign nation state, in the same way, frankly, she has on many others. And it's exposed fault lines in the Democratic Party that it seems to me people like Nancy Pelosi are just not adroit enough to read, because, there are those of us who are, in that coalition who are younger, who not only don't want her to be in any way condemned or silenced, we find the whole exercise to be bigoted and disgusting. Anyways, you can tell I have a lot of feelings about this, but that's my preamble, Professor, and feel free to correct me or elaborate either way.
No, I'm with you. I think, admittedly, I think some of the brouhaha is because Ilhan Omar is coming from a subculture that doesn't practice the rhetorical nuances of American politics.
Right.
And so, people who grow up in the United States are in politics, are aware, that the Israel lobbies are powerful. And they may have mixed feelings about this in some instances, but they don't think it's illegitimate. Right. Because they're also aware that there's lots of ethnic lobbies in the United States. I mean, Nancy Pelosi led a charge to try to get the Turkish government to admit the Armenian genocide. Why? Because there are lots of Armenians in her district in San Francisco, and they wanted her to do that. So I think that the line you cross is when you say that the Israel lobbies are a manifestation of Jewish power that is somehow illegitimate, or as you say, the hypnotizes, or is somehow out of the mainstream, because it's not. Right. It's just how politics are done in the United States. If you have an interest and you don't have a lobby, then you're stupid. Right. So I think she didn't come up through that system.
Right.
And in her subculture, which focuses on the injustices of the occupation, which is something that Americans don't generally talk about. I mean, You and I have talked about it here, but let's face it, there is almost never a report on CNN or MSNBC on what's going on in the West Bank.
Right.
Almost never. And so this is just not up for conversation. And so what she's thinking about is, why is this massive injustice being allowed to go on, and why are people attacking her for speaking out on it, and more particularly people who don't seem to have a dog in the fight in ordinary terms. And then she's saying, well, it's because AIPAC is directing organizations to give money to their campaigns. It's all about the Benjamins. And this
I had no problem with that one.
Yeah,
I think that's true. That's true. Right. Sorry.
It's the other side of the coin, that there's nothing illegitimate about it either. But that's what's objectionable to the attacks on her, is that she's now not being attacked for somehow suggesting that Jewish political interests in the United States are being expressed in a illegitimate way. She didn't say that.
Right.
She's being attacked for simply pointing out the truth, which is that there are Israel lobbies, and they are influential. And if you're going to attack somebody as a racist for saying that, then the word racist just has no longer any meaning.
Well, that's the other amazing thing, is that they're deploying, and again, I always say that some of my critiques of certain misuses of identity politics go back, in fact, to early conversations I had on Israel, where I was like, no, because I share an identity with somebody, I'm not going to support them utterly subjugating another group of people. Sorry. And that's not an argument, let alone a justification for the obscenity of these policies. And so we're in a situation where, of course, this whole conversation is loaded with a huge amount of racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia targeted at her. And then, you have these grotesque spectacles of Steve Scalise, who literally called himself David Duke without the baggage, actually indirectly implying that she has dual loyalty in terms of getting intelligence briefings, something that she never did in terms of what people are lying about what she said. And it just and I'm wondering though if the dam is kind of breaking here. I mean, Bernie Sanders had her back in a very clear way. And what's interesting is it seems like everybody's showing the ball, because some people like me are coming forward and saying, hey, look, my politics are such that I want everybody to have full equal democracy, cultural rights, security and protection in that area. And in my view, that's probably some type of secular binational state in my ideology. And then people like Brett Weinstein, who've been smearing and lying about, and in a very bizarre and sick way, Ilhan Omar for a while, are coming out and basically saying, essentially, yes, that criticism of Israel is a form of anti-Semitism, which obviously, in my view, is in fact anti-Semitic, because you're reducing a incredibly persecuted and global population to one nation state, which is inaccurate.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's very dangerous for the Jewish communities in the world that this principle of criticizing Israel as anti-Semitic get established, because first of all, we've already discussed about how politics in Israel is horrible.
Right.
If you're not able to discuss it or criticize it without implicating the entire Jewish community, then that is a backdoor form of extreme anti-Semitism. All Jews don't want to be tagged with Netanyahu, and more especially with Kahana.
Right.
I mean, there's enormous irony that because of the backlash from the Democratic left, Pelosi is now going to only have a condemnation, a resolution condemning hate speech. But who is a bigger purveyor of hate speech than Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel? So it's a little bit Alice in Wonderlandish, but I think that Representative Omar, if she manages to keep her seat and go forward, will eventually find ways of navigating the rhetoric that's necessary to deploy to be effective on this issue. And this is the one place I'm a big supporter of hers. I don't want to undermine her, but I do think if you're talking about political effectiveness, that there are ways of expressing oneself that maybe are more likely to result in actual achievements.
Well, and I agree with you, and I think every indication is that she's obviously incredibly talented and diligent, and she'll absorb it. And I think also not only strategically but legitimately. I think she's actually clearly a very empathetic person who's interested and engaged. And I will, I'll say, I didn't think I would contribute money to anybody besides Bernie Sanders, and it wasn't much, but it felt very satisfying to contribute money to her congressional committee, and I hope everybody else will do the same, because she needs. This is a flaring, but ongoingly she's going to need an enormous amount of solidarity and support to fight back against all of just the lies and base bigotry that will be targeted at her.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to say, though, is that what she's done is, I think, enormously useful.
Yes.
In the sense that the Nancy Pelosi's think they're progressive and have never done anything at all for the oppressed Palestinians who are stateless.
Right.
and in some instances under siege, in other instances are actively having their property and their rights stolen from them by armed Israeli squatters on their land. And Pelosi won't admit this, has never admitted it, goes to AIPAC and talks about how the alliance with Israel is essential to being American, which is exactly the kind of thing that Ilhan Omar was complaining about. And the Democratic establishment has to come to terms with the reality of the occupation, which is not going away, which is going to produce more and more crises. And my nightmare is that some way, somehow, the Israeli far right will find a way to destroy the Dome of the Rock and the mosque, the Aqsa Mosque, and I think they have no idea what that's going to produce in the greater Muslim world, because, in Iraq, Peter Galbraith said that the most successful act of terrorism in Iraq killed no one, which was the blowing up of the Samarra Golden Dome, which was sacred to Shiites, and it kicked off in 2006 a massive civil war in Iraq, and people care about these religious symbols in ways that I think secular pundits don't understand. So there are lots of things about the occupation that could produce further conflict and very dire conflict, but that's the one that's foremost in my mind. And so the idea we could, Mitt Romney in 2012 was asked about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and he said, well, we just have to kick the can down the road. There's nothing that can be done, and that is extremely dangerous.
Professor Juan Cole, he's the author of Muhammad, Prophet of Peace. You got to read Informed Comment if you want to understand what's happening in the broader MENA region, but also other things like sustainable energy. It's an indispensable resource. I learned so much from you. Professor Cole, thank you so much for your time.
It's been great talking to you, Michael.
Thank you. All right, folks, we're going to take a brief break, and then we're going to come back with our second guest, the great Meagan Day, Jacobin magazine. Welcome back to this double-header Majority Report. Joining us now is Meagan Day. She's a staff writer at the Jacobin magazine. Her latest pieces are Wielding the Imperial Presidency and Among the Bernie Bros in Brooklyn. Meagan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.
So, Meagan, I want to start with your piece. I was at the same rally you were in Brooklyn, and as were thousands and thousands of other people. And I want to put just one quote in relationship to your piece, and then I'll throw to you for your impressions of the speeches and the people who were there and so on, and the energy of this campaign. There was a piece in Slate where they asked a handful of Bernie supporters about the Bernie Bro moniker. And some of them, I guess, would fit that definition, and they sort of joked about it. There was one woman they talked to, as a woman of color. They described her as a woman of color somewhere in Upper Manhattan, East or West, who was a nanny. Was 35 years old, and she contributed $3 to Bernie's campaign. And she was basically like, yeah, I'm like pretty serious about politics, and I kind of need this agenda in my life. And I don't like, I'm sorry, I don't sit on Twitter all day. I don't really know what you're talking about. And I thought that was like, if we could give her voice and millions of other voices, unmediated time, we'd have a much more sane and honest election cycle. And I think your piece did that as well. So what were your impressions of the rally, and what did you come away thinking?
The main thing that stood out to me about Bernie's Brooklyn rally is that it was enormously racially diverse for a Bernie rally. I mean, something has changed, I think, in the political discourse over the last few years. It's not to say that there wasn't a diverse base of Bernie supporters in 2016. There actually was, especially among younger people, which isn't to say that he didn't struggle with the black vote in the South. But I think that something has changed, actually. I think that people of color in particular are starting to warm up to Bernie Sanders, and young people of color are not just warming up to Bernie Sanders, they're coming out in droves. And that's what I saw at the Brooklyn rally. It's also true that, Brooklyn's a very diverse place. The neighborhood is mostly a POC neighborhood that the rally was held in. And it was held on the Brooklyn College campus, which Bernie attended for a brief time before transferring to the University of Chicago. And many Brooklyn College students were there. The article that I wrote, which is called, it's tongue-in-cheek, Among the Brooklyn Bernie Bros, it actually came out, by the way, the same day as a New York Magazine piece sort of profiling the sort of like left literati of Brooklyn, and so you can see the sort of different visions of what left politics
I have
Brooklyn
to say,
looks like.
I read that piece, and I some people will not like my hot take. I thought it was hilarious, and I thought some of the thought the jabs landed. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it was distorted and it's unfair and unrepresentative, but it was a funny piece.
Yeah, it was pretty colorful, and like those people were obviously present saying those things. So
Yeah, no, they did say those things.
You have to expand.
Right.
You have to expand your view of who actually constitutes the Brooklyn left. Right. And what I found was lots of young people, lots of young women, lots of young people of color, of course, in addition to men and white people, but people of all ages as well. Came out, and they came out because they're extraordinarily excited about Bernie Sanders' platform. And this is what everybody that I spoke to was very quick, without my prompting, to pivot to the issues. Right. The two issues that came up over and over again were Medicare for all and free college. People also wanted to talk to me about the importance of a $15 minimum wage, a Green New Deal, and serious climate policy, and criminal justice reform. And people this is a Bernie rally, so these are Bernie supporters, but they sort of uniformly felt that Bernie had the strongest approach to these issues. But Medicare for all and free college tuition seemed to be resonating on a very personal level with a lot of the people that I spoke to. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to two 20-year-old Brooklyn College students. They're both they're both Muslim women, children of immigrants, come from working class households. They're friends with each other. Their names are Mayar Eliskandrani and Minahil Khan. And Mayar said, she said, when I was making, this is a quote from her, when I was making my college decision, tuition was a really big deal. I got other offers, but it didn't really matter because I knew my family couldn't afford it. This is a gut level reaction to the potential for individual freedom that Bernie Sanders' free tuition proposal actually would make a huge difference in her own life. And then Minahil Khan said, I come from a low-income household, and just the other day I had to walk out of a dentist's office. I have insurance, but I couldn't afford the copay, so I just left.
Yep.
And these were their justifications for why. These were the first things that they told me when I asked them why they had come out to support Bernie Sanders. And they also mentioned that it was really important to them to be hearing from a working class child of immigrants who grew up in Brooklyn himself and attended Brooklyn College. And that's something that really stood out about the Brooklyn rally. As you probably read in all of the coverage, Bernie took a turn toward the autobiographical, which is extraordinarily unusual for him, but never one to abandon politics or settle for mere pandering. He polemicized it almost immediately and launched into, I thought, a wonderful portion of the speech where he compared his own working class upbringing to Donald Trump's upper class upbringing, and I think it really resonated with a lot of the people in the crowd across lines of racial difference, of gender difference, of difference in citizenship status or ethnic background, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I was there, and that was, I mean, it was hugely effective against Donald Trump, and also, I actually almost teared up when he talked about his background, and those were two things that I also wanted to put on the table. One, I'll take them one at a time. Okay, so one, look. Again, there, in a broad generality, like who would not love to see as a African American woman candidate beat Donald Trump, like just destroy, embarrass, and humiliate him in the Electoral College and popular vote, and people's need and desire to have a different representation in the White House is correct and valid and totally legitimate. Obviously I don't think it supersedes vital class and policy differences, which is why I support Bernie. And that's just the base of the conversation. And I think we can be respectful, hopefully, and good faith about it on both sides of that equation. And I'm clear where I stand. But I don't want to delegitimize that sentiment either. That being said, to see a man whose family was directly close relatives killed in the Holocaust, whose family fled Europe in that context. The old white man moniker, I'm actually going to say, is essentially anti-Semitic, disgusting, and I'm not, I don't want to hear that. So I just want to put that first one across. Yeah.
I'll give you a quote. So, not being myself a person of color, I will give you a quote from a young woman of color that I spoke to at the rally. So right. I asked this young woman, she's 22 years old, she lives in Manhattan, her family comes from Palestine.
Yep.
I asked her if she agreed with the liberal talking point that Bernie is unable to represent people of color because he's a white man, and she responded, no, policy over identity.
Right.
And then she continued, people who say he's just an old white man and it's more of the same are ignoring the importance of his policies for people of color. The people who will benefit the most from Medicare for All, for example, will be working class people of color. When he talks about championing unions and workers' rights, he's talking about the well-being of working class people of color. As someone who's a person of color and an immigrant, not an American citizen, I would vote for him if I could. And then I'll go on and address the gender piece. Being a woman myself, I can say that, it would be enormously satisfying to see a woman in the White House and certainly to see a woman beat Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is that Bernie Sanders proposes that we tax the wealthiest people in society, who are disproportionately men, to give millions and millions of people who are actually disproportionately women, because women are disproportionately poor, universal health care, universal child care, free college tuition, student debt relief. And he also proposes that the United States guarantee women full reproductive rights, gender pay equity, stronger workplace protections, and unions that they can turn to in the event of harassment and mistreatment, and a living wage. And as a woman, I see my own interests reflected in that platform, and I have a very hard time justifying opposition to Bernie Sanders on feminist grounds for that reason.
Right.
Of course, some people will say, oh, well, Elizabeth Warren likes all of these things too, and she's a woman, so why wouldn't you just prefer Elizabeth Warren? But my answer to that is very simple, which is that in 2008, Elizabeth Warren was writing white papers about how single payer was actually, a preferable approach to health care for the working class majority. She seemed to understand that that was the case, and yet for many years after that, she actually declined to champion it.
Right.
She, in 2013, called Medicare for All politically unacceptable. In 2012, I believe, when she ran, she didn't run on it, even though her opponent did. And that's very different from what Bernie Sanders was doing at the exact same time. At the same time, and in fact for decades prior, Bernie Sanders was actually making decisions about the kind of politician that he wanted to be, not based on quote-unquote political acceptability, but actually trying to push the boundaries of what was acceptable by using the office as a bully pulpit for ideas. I mean, he and Warren agreed, but they both agreed that single payer was preferable for the working class majority and, especially women. But Bernie Sanders was the one who was actually championing it, running on it, and making it ultimately into a mass demand. And so for me, it's pretty obvious that he's the more serious candidate with regards to, I mean, there's going to be enormous pushback on Medicare for all. Who do we trust to actually muscle through this extremely ambitious reform? The person who was cowed into a pose of submission by the idea of political unacceptability, or the person who refused to accept unacceptability and actually pushed the boundaries of the impossible?
Right, absolutely. And let alone all the other candidates who, have obviously don't even have like the progressive credibility. Yeah, right, exactly. So there's the difference between Sanders and, I mean, we titled a recent episode of Michael Brooks' show, The Difference Between Sanders and Warren and everybody else, right? Like there's this thing to hash out between two good candidates who have, are absolutely, in the same realm. And then Bernie has major advantages in terms of activism, structure, and commitment. And then, in fact, the other candidates. But that was the other thing too that really came across, was not only was it important and correct and actually moving the way not only he spoke of his biography, but definitely Nina Turner and Sean King, the way they framed it. But it struck me that, with a lot of boomer candidates, it's like, you wheel out, particularly at the convention time or something like, hey, I'm Bill Clinton and I marched for civil rights. And, I haven't done a goddamn thing for 40 years, but I was there. And the thing that was so interesting about this was this candidate who's so hesitant about exploiting his biography in that way. You realize, like, not only is it not sort of biographical anecdote, this really is just a through line. I mean, this is the same person that got arrested protesting housing segregation in Chicago, is the same person who ran improbable campaigns to become mayor of Burlington and protect the public park and empower small businesses, was actually a nationally recognized effective mayor, and then toiled in the House and the Senate for Medicare for all, and voted against welfare reform, and opposed the Iraq invasion, and talked about wealth concentration when everybody was deregulating Wall Street. This is the same. And even in 2019, the last thing I'll put on this, he is a better candidate in 2016, both as a communicator and he's more to the left. And what's so interesting is that not in all areas, but the areas in which he's been pushed, like he talked about gentrification. He said the word military-industrial complex. He's like, okay, I will get better on race and racism, so I'm going to talk about gentrification. I'm not going to, do the nay-nay. I'm going to talk about this actual stuff and incorporate it into this broader agenda. And again, there's more to do. It's not perfect, but these are significant strides. And the same person that was that youthful protester.
Right. I actually think that Bernie Sanders is not content with pandering. He finds it to be reprehensible, and actually, in some cases, it's held him back because he doesn't realize, or he hasn't necessarily realized in the past that there's a degree of communication about the importance of these issues that he might be lacking, hoping that the policy ideas will speak for themselves. I think he's gotten a lot better on that front. And after Brooklyn, he spoke in Chicago, and he did an excellent job, not just paying lip service to racial justice, but actually presenting a coherent political worldview about the conditions under which racism is actually manifests and shapes people's lives, their life outcomes, degrades their living conditions, and what a politician can do to change it. But I also want to add to that the main theme that I'm seeing coming through after going to the Brooklyn rally and after going to the Chicago rally is not the autobiography, and it's not the specific focus on racial justice. It's actually a broader focus on the importance of movements to his own potential presidency. And I actually think this is really important, and I'm going to tell you why. It's that Bernie Sanders is somewhat of an accident of history. So I'm a socialist. I'm an organized socialist. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm a writer for a socialist magazine, and I can tell you with great certainty that socialists, while Bernie Sanders' 2016 run was a massive boon to the socialist movement, we would not have designed it this way if we could do it on paper. What we would have designed instead was the growth of the labor movement, strong unions, the growth possibly of a party, or at least a party-like formation that was capable of running and disciplining candidates from within its own ranks, and the growth of left social movements throughout the country in all sectors that would be able to support a presidential candidate. And we would have that candidate rise up from that organic left groundswell. But that's not what happened. What actually happened was that Bernie Sanders is like a time traveler from the last time that class politics was on anybody's lips in the United States, and he kind of went underground a little bit. He had his sort of like 4-decade-long wilderness period during which
these Obi-Wan Kenobi people. It's like him and Corbyn.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We're extraordinarily lucky that he did not compromise on his principles like so many people who came out of the New Left did, and he stayed really, really consistent. And we're also really lucky that he's still alive and still has the energy to be, a leader, and that he has the will to do that. So there's some subjective qualities here, and that it happened to line up with the objective material conditions. The financial crisis happened in 2008, Occupy happened in 2011, and the mood of the nation changed, and Bernie Sanders happened to still be alive, still be consistent, still be principled, still be a democratic socialist, and he's built up the record to actually justify him taking a leadership position in the American political sphere. So the reason I'm saying all of this is because if he becomes president, we don't have that organic, robust left infrastructure populating the space between dog catcher and president, either in the electoral sphere or in the non-electoral sphere. We still are very happy that Bernie Sanders could become president for a variety of good reasons, but it does pose some tricky problems. He's going to face a hostile Congress. He's not going to have a ton of sympathizers in the state. He might not even have people. Might not be a robust political education outside of the state to make sense of the pushback that he's going to get to his agenda. So the only way to actually get around this problem is to build mass extra-parliamentary left social movements that can create crises outside of the state in the form of protests, in the form of strikes, in the form of pressure campaigns, in the form of media attention, in order to pressure lawmakers to respond to those crises, solve them, and therefore that go along with Bernie Sanders' agenda, even though they don't want to, even though they're beholden to their donors and so on and so forth. So I think he understands the importance of extra-parliamentary movements. And you saw that at the Chicago rally in particular, where he brought up an 18-year-old Black Lives Matter activist as the first speaker at that rally. He brought up an anti-gentrification activist who was also a young woman of color. And then he spent the bulk of his racial justice speech talking about his political history outside the state. That's what's really important. When he talks about his political history now, he's not just talking about his record as a mayor, as a congressman, as a senator. He's talking about his political record when he was just like you in the crowd, when he was just an ordinary person who wanted to make change in the world and who put, his body on the line and who devoted his time and his energy to actually participating in movements to make that change.
And that's in the final couple of minutes. I mean, that's how you talk about him wielding the presidency and he's really nailing. I mean, another thing that I noticed in the Brooklyn speech was he reformulated that Obama, not red states, not blue states, but instead of a kind of like mushy call for sort of like shared civility, he was like, recognize that you're all workers. And that's how those, right? And so that's the relation. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I have an analysis of that, which is that Obama was trying to unify and not polarize. Like that was his strategy, was like, we're all in this together, but he was unable to identify protagonists and antagonists. But Bernie Sanders wants to unify literally by polarizing along new lines, which are class lines. He knows that we can unite the vast majority of the American people against the billionaire class, because most people in America are not billionaires. So it's actually a completely different strategy than Obama's, even though it has some of the same features, the not red state, not blue state, uniting across lines of difference. Obama was just uniting across lines of difference, period. That would be good. Bernie Sanders is unite across lines of difference against the people that we are all most different from, who are the billionaires who are controlling the levers of society.
And as a final thought, I mean, that's where, like, not only, and of course, like, he is, in many respects, he's the front runner. He has the most organic support. He's the most significant candidate, he has the credibility, of the successful previous run. And then, unlike being a front runner, obviously, there's just this. I mean, there's the sort of natural, like, I understand, again, sometimes there's valid criticisms of him. Those valid criticisms come from the left of him, usually, so they're not even electorally represented. And then there's even just like, hey, look, I'm a centrist or I'm part of a different political machine. Okay, you're not going to support Bernie Sanders, but there's also a huge amount of just irrationality and weirdness in the dislike of him. So there's that sort of, look at this nice old Jewish guy who wants to give you health care. What an asshole. That just sort of bizarre dislike of him that comes across in mainstream media circles. But so that's the dialectic. And ultimately, he will win even as the front runner, as a grassroots door-to-door candidate. And even more importantly, that's actually how he'll govern, and the only chance we have of both his agenda and also the broader social and class conflict we need to have if we're going to get our way out of the climate, the inequality, any of these predicaments, the predicaments of capitalism.
It's kind of lucky for us in a way, even though this is an accident of history and it's not how socialists would have planned it on paper. It's kind of lucky for us that he'll be in this predicament in the White House of not having any friends in the state, because it will actually force him to get any of his agenda passed. It will actually force him to use the office very differently. He will have to use it as he'll have to be a tribune for class politics from the position of the presidency, building movements outside of the state in order to get anything passed, just on a sheer strategy level, which is fantastic in a way, right? Because it reduces the possibility that he's going to capitulate to the structural pressures of the presidency. Because if he wants to pass Medicare for all, he's sure as hell going to have to get people out on the streets, flooding, having town halls, flooding, politicians' offices, holding mass protests in order to get it done. If he can't do that, then it's not going to happen. So it's going to turn him, I think, into a very effective grassroots movement builder just by the nature of the dynamics.
Meagan Day, I agree with you completely, and people should read all of Meagan Day's just indispensable work at Jacobin. Really, everywhere you're coming from.
Thanks so much.
Honestly, because I send it to people too who are, like in the baby boomer cohort, people of different, or actually the worst, Gen Xers. People at different and you're the type of writer that people can be like, okay, I at least I get this more now across the board. So I really, really appreciate your work, and thanks so much for taking the time, Meagan Day.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Take care. All right, folks. That was a good double header. Become a member of the Majority Report today. Less than a cup of coffee a day to support robust, unbought, unbossed, independent media with, look at all of the terrain we've covered, from Tim Apple to socialism, how a Bernie presidency would work, to the real nature of Israel, to freeing Lula and restoring Brazilian democracy. And that's just on the first half of the show. We're going to see you in the fun half. Of course, I cover a lot of similar things, but very in-depth coverage of international relations, philosophy, all sorts of other areas on the Michael Brooks Show. I would become a patron of it today. Patreon.com/TMBS. This weekend, an illicit history of Caribbean debt and imperial colonial relationships with Tamanisha John, PhD candidate at Florida International University. This past Sunday, Ben Burgess joined us to talk about logic for the left and who is really suppressing free speech. Our YouTube channel is flying. There's a ton of clips there where you can get a sense of it. Go to Michael Brooks Show on YouTube, subscribe there, and of course, patreon.com/TMBS. Jamie, what's cooking with the anti-mother effing fada? I thought of that guy who complained about his kid hearing too much swears. Sorry.
Yeah, you gotta protect the children. MR is for the children.
Shade.
So
if it's for the children, you should swear more so they can learn.
That's what I said.
So they can learn how to be cool for school.
That's what I said. But I'm not the boss of this show. So if you want to hear me swear, you can listen to the Antifada. This week we kind of effed up the sound, but you could still hear us. They say you're not a real podcaster until you've lost a whole episode. We had on Hamilton Nolan of Splinter News to talk about labor organizing in the media and beyond. Is millennial entitlement good for labor organizing? I don't know. What else do we talk about? I don't know.
Millennial entitlement. The intern generation.
Yeah,
so,
like
so,
how...
so effing entitled. The people who's like, hey, is it possible... Oh, of course, don't worry about healthcare, but do you think maybe I can get like a subway voucher for doing like free unpaid labor for your multinational? Super entitled people.
So entitled.
Yes.
Yeah. Hamilton and I also squashed an ancient beef that we had. And he talks about his successful labor organizing drive at Gawker right before it was, everything.
Oh, good drive.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Right before, who came in and messed with everyone's world. I talk about my unsuccessful labor organizing drive at the place I used to work. Check it out, folks. Patreon.com/theantifada or any podcast app.
Matt.
Wakefield by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a short story. We do the whole thing. Check that out. Also for YouTube, The Unparalleled Adventures of One Hunts Fall is finally up there in all of its 3 hours and 20 minutes.
All right, folks. We'll see you on the fun half.
You hate that we're here right now talking.
Welcome back to the fun half. We are here in full effect. Let me start with this because I'll get to this story. It's very important. Kentucky Fried Comrade. Hey, Michael, reporting out of NBC yesterday found that the DHS, in coordination with Border Patrol, were compiling internal lists and investigating journalists involved in caravan demonstrations in November. This includes DHS bringing journalists in for screening. That's right. I'll quote now from this is a write-up from Reuters. The U.S. government is systemically identifying and monitoring journalists who cover immigration, civil rights attorneys, and protesters who demonstrate against President Trump, according to 2 news reports. Dozens of reporters, immigration lawyers, and activists, particularly those covering the U.S.'s controversial treatment of asylum seekers near San Diego or representing refugees there, were being tracked by a quote-unquote secret database accessible to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS agencies, and the FBI, according to NBC San Diego, a report sourced from documents leaked by Homeland Security official. In some cases, their passports were flagged and they were interrogated by U.S. officials. The document, dated January 2019, titled San Diego Sector Foreign Operations Branch Migrant Caravan FY 2019, suspect organizations, coordinators, instigators, and media, show individual photos, sometimes from their passports, their date of birth, home country, and their alleged ties to the immigration caravan. They include 10 journalists, 7 of whom are U.S. citizens, a U.S. attorney, and 487 people from the United States and other countries labeled as organizers, instigators, or their roles, quote-unquote, unknown. Border Protection told NBC that it is, quote-unquote, protocol following these incidents to collect evidence that might be needed for future legal actions and to determine if the event was orchestrated. So, first, there is a long history of this. You can look at reporting on even like the environmental movement and the depth of surveillance and harassment by organizations like the FBI of people, including even just doing like basic like leafleting on local pollution issues. So this is a systems-wide problem. But you can also see that there's a long, and of course, famous examples like COINTELPRO, but this stuff didn't go away in the 60s and 70s. This went through the environmental movement, the anti-globalization movement. There's always been heavy, and of course, anti-war protesters under the Bush era. There's been heavy intelligence apparatus focus on any kind of progressive activism. What is interesting in light of having a fascistic president and all of the fake news memes is that what already is procedure from authoritarian institutions in the federal government, they said something about in this response from the customs official. They said basically what I just said. It is protocol following these incidents to collect evidence that might be needed for future legal actions, and to determine if the event was orchestrated. Well, who said that the caravan was orchestrated? Nobody doing any real reporting. Nobody with any actual experience involved in that. But there were plenty of crackpots involved in right-wing media that talked about George Soros and all sorts of other conspiracy theories. So even that word orchestrated shows the feedback loop between the lies and right-wing media networks and then actual governmental action. We saw a Black Lives Matter activist put in jail briefly, but doesn't matter. Jailed, based partially off of intelligence services following a report on InfoWars. So that is the feedback loop we have here. And again, the last thing I'll say, I think, please, my God, can we stop being pedantic about the use of the word fascism? Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And that's not counting the Black Lives Matter activists found dead under very suspicious circumstances.
Yeah, in Ferguson.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Like they have a history. The government has a history of doing this. So
100%.
It's not like some crazy conspiracy theory to think that they might still be doing it.
It would be a conspiracy theory to not think they're doing it.
And we know about COINTELPRO, but the actual thing that is, I think, more submerged is that this is more decentralized than that. Like this takes place in police departments across the country without, federal, orchestration.
Right. And there's all sorts of formal and informal feedback loops. You're calling from a 718 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, just much abused caller. Don't do your Peter Thiel impression. It's Greg from New York.
Oh, welcome back, Greg. It's sort of good to hear your voice, maybe. We'll see how this goes. All right, Greg, we're on a very tight time-wise.
Wound tighter than anything else.
Yes. What's on your mind, Greg?
Yes,
It's good to hear from you. I hope you're
so
doing well.
no, I am. Thank you very much for asking. I tuned into your show recently. I've been mostly following other progressive shows. No, I'm very happy Bernie's running. He's like, as a person, he is my number one favorite candidate. As a policy, I would say number two, actually.
Who's number one? Andrew Yang?
Andrew Yang, of course, with the UBI.
I knew it.
And
this is how disturbing.
Yeah.
This is how
Have you guys
sick
had
this
him on the
world is.
show?
No.
All right. But I do have one pet peeve with Bernie. I just want to kind of bring up and ask you what you think.
Tread carefully,
It's this
Greg.
thing.
Sorry, I'm just kidding. Yes,
I
go
love
ahead.
everything about his policies.
Okay,
I'd
what's your
rather
pet peeve?
have
What's your
universal
pet peeve?
health care. Sure.
What's your
the
pet
peeve is he calls himself a democratic socialist, but he is clearly a social democrat. And the problem I have with that is that in the age of Trump, with all this, Trump calling himself a nationalist, and then people on the left get triggered with the word nationalist, the same way people on the right constantly, go ahead and call Bernie, oh, you want Venezuela, you want bread lines, socialism doesn't work. And that is a conversation that I feel divides the electorate, that we could actually, Bernie, I think back in the past, maybe he was more socialist and he just kind of stuck with it. But he's really a social democrat. I wish the conversation was not.
All right, Greg, I hear you. I hear you.
Up.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. So I'm going to let you go, and I'll answer your question, all right? Thanks for the call. Honestly, it's nice to hear from you. We were worried about you. So I'll just stipulate. So, okay, and I think Jamie will have a lot of thoughts on this, but let me just say really quick.
Greg Call.
Sorry, Greg. No, I'm just joking.
That was a little uncalled
To
for.
the very talented James. Thank you, though.
Just joking.
No, it's just joking. It's a joke. I think that Bernie Sanders, first of all, I do think Bernie Sanders is actually legitimately in the democratic socialist tradition. I do. And I think that particularly if you contrast him to the state of social democratic parties in like Europe today, he does have a conception of class politics that's really clear. And interestingly enough, when he was mayor of Burlington, he certainly supported socially responsible businesses, and he actually gets a lot of credit from companies like Seventh Generation and Ben & Jerry's. But he was very supportive of things like co-ops, and that is a form of worker-owned democratic socialism. So he is in that tradition. The second point, to be honest, I just don't care. I think I also like if people insist that he's a social. I think there's a specific argument that is relevant in our circles about why he's a democratic socialist versus a social democrat that kind of matters. In general, I don't care. I think the terminology stuff, I don't care. The third thing, though, that I'll say specifically to you is they called Obama a socialist who wanted to turn the country into Cuba or whatever. So they're going to say that if Andrew Yang got the Democratic nomination as I think he's a venture capital guy who supports UBI, they will call him a socialist who wants Venezuela. They will call Kamala Harris a socialist that wants Venezuela. They will call Amy Klobuchar a socialist that wants Venezuela. They will call Joe Biden a socialist that wants Venezuela. So building any frame based off of the lies of the right about your character, about your history, about your politics, bullshit. Don't cede an inch. They'll lie. Anyways.
I don't know. Yeah, there's kind of a fine line between democratic socialist and social democrat that I don't think people always realize when they're like, oh, well, he's a democratic socialist. Like, what does that mean? I feel like the modifier democratic is often appended to socialist to mean like, oh, but not too socialist. Like, we're still going to have some form of markets or some kind of private sector, even if it's like a mixture of co-ops and whatever, which is a little bit strange to me because further left formations politically are also very democratic, right? Like, anarchists want full democracy, basically. They want everything to be made by workers' co-ops and syndicates and all decisions to be made in a very horizontalist way by these like community councils. And, if you have a larger governing body, your delegates are going to be recallable and extremely accountable to the people. So I guess the framework is a little bit weird to begin with of democratic socialist, and I think Bernie could totally fit the rubric. So I don't really get what the problem is on a purely pedantic level. On like a social level, in terms of how words are commonly used, like if he can make socialism sound good to people, like I'm fine with letting him call himself a socialist, you know? Like,
and I think
at a time when the left is relatively small and weak, like we need all the help we can get.
I think
and
he
like,
definitely is.
If there are some people out there who call themselves socialists, who maybe are just like social democrats or like Bernie Democrats, whatever, like that's fine. I'll take it. Plenty of people join DSA calling themselves socialists who don't totally know what that means. And then, you know, they get there and they come to our political ed meetings. Hopefully they get involved in the struggle and they learn a whole lot more about it and become really good
these
comrades.
are also genuinely contested terms.
Yeah.
Like even like these are not, there is everything from a legitimate American Eugene Debs tradition that is absolutely a form of socialism to, to people who are like serious readers of Ho Chi Minh and trying to like formulate to Julius Nyerere, to the fact that all of what we call certainly continental European social democratic parties, they have labor and certainly in German have literal Marxist roots. So I'm not big on either the I just want to detoxify and plant the word socialism. Besides that, I truly don't care. I want people to not be children about Marx, because even if you're not a Marxist, you have to read Marx. That's really all I care about. Yeah.
I don't know how everybody who used the term democratic socialism thought of it, but George Orwell used it specifically after the Spanish Civil War, basically to distinguish between his critiques of the USSR and its role in that conflict. So, like, I think that I actually don't. I'm not as sensitive, and I know Griscom has the same sort of sensitivity to using democratic in front of socialism.
It feels like an apology, or like, oh, but not that kind of socialist, not that kind. We're not
It was at that time. Like, that's the thing.
And it
like,
wasn't
historically
because,
it was.
And it wasn't because Orwell it wanted a more market-based socialism. It's because like he wanted more democracy. So the actual term democratic was like, and I actually don't mind foregrounding that, especially as a way to like get people more comfortable with the term.
I agree with that. And then I think the substantive disagreement is social democrats and democratic socialists would have something to do with to what degree workers own the means of production. And that is a more substantive argument, but frankly, it's not a present argument. And I think the closest distinction, though, that I can see in real lived politics is Elizabeth Warren is a great progressive, maybe even social democrat, who has a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really good commitments. Bernie Sanders is something of a movement democratic socialist who wants to reconfigure power relations in this country. And I do think that it's just a different starting point. And how that plays out practically, we'll see.
Yeah, they're all reformist trash to me, so call yourself what you want.
Really? Do you speak that way to your father? How dare you? You're calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is Ronald Reagan.
Hey, Ronald Reagan. Thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
You're welcome. Hey. So you do really good impressions. And
it's true.
Kind of for two reasons. I think that you nail the voice, right?
Mostly. Not always, but mostly.
But then you most of the time. But then you also do this thing where you like juxtapose the character with the real life person, right? In interesting ways. And I thought that yesterday when you did neoliberal shill Jamie, it was like your best impression ever.
When did I do? I honestly don't even remember. When did I do that?
I don't remember this either.
When did I do that?
It sounded so much like Jamie that I thought it was actually Jamie. But I knew it wasn't because you were like, neoliberalism actually came from a good place, and it's not so bad.
Oh my God.
And I thought, this is like...
Oh, shit.
That is not what
I'm
I
tapping
said.
out of this one.
Like, this is like the best character that you've ever done. So hats off to you. I love you all. Bye.
Guys,
oh my God.
Jimmy Carter saw that there was diminishing profit margins and he needed to deregulate the airplanes.
Spot on. Spot on.
That was provocative. All right.
I'm not even going to take that in a serious direction because it was hilarious.
Let's do some more sound. Do you want a reminder, if you still really need one, why Joe Scarborough is trash?
Listen to his band.
Listen to his, well, don't subject yourself to that. That's a lot. But here's a guy, and I'm not going to suggest, like, let me just say as a baseline, Joe Scarborough is not known specifically for like a history of like race baiting, for sure. He was elected as part of the Gingrich Republican class of 1994, which could absolutely, I mean, they're slightly less overt than Trump, but that was a class and a campaign on the dog whistles of crime and welfare that could absolutely compete with anything that comes out of today's overtly white nationalist Republican Party. And Joe Scarborough, I mean, again, another failure of certain resistance mindset. It is so bare minimum to get that Donald Trump is an incompetent scumbag who should not be managing a friendlies, let alone the White House. That, I mean, is this really what we're giving credit for? And this is the fallout from that credit. Joe Scarborough saying disgusting, ridiculous things like this.
Questioning Jews' loyalty to America and suggesting that Jews can't be loyal to both America and Israel at the same time, or that someone like me who is pro-Israeli cannot be loyal to America while also being loyal to Israel in believing that a strong Israel is good for the Middle East. I mean, and by the way, even while I'm disagreeing profoundly with Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership there. So it's very offensive. And I mean, unless this party wants to dissolve into a left-leaning version of a party of Steve Kings and a party of David Dukes, they need to call her out anytime this anti-Semitic trope is trotted out. And if that means condemning those statements every day, they should.
She did not say that. Period. We can play that statement again from yesterday where she did not say that at all.
Yeah, Sam thought there was another clip as a result of after that.
Yes, that's the clip that they're lying about. There's Mark Ruffalo, who's a Jewish activist, and he said, I was there. I didn't hear anything. Fought against anti-Semitism my entire life. This is literally a party, we played it yesterday, where Steve Scalise, who campaigned on being David Duke without the baggage, is calling into question her patriotism, the security of her being on the Foreign Relations Committee, which is the play of these people to get her off foreign relations, not only because of Israel-Palestine, but because of Elliot Abrams, because of Venezuela, because she talks and has courage about speaking on U.S. foreign policy. And Joe Scarborough takes up all of this fake currency he's built up after enabling and promoting Donald Trump, by the way, for over a year. Donald Trump had the easiest, most cushy appearances on Morning Joe. It was a great joke. You can look at that clip when Donald Trump did that impression of that reporter with I think it was muscular dystrophy. Check out how funny Joe Scarborough thought that was. And you know, I'm someone who has never hid how funny I think Trump is. Okay, that was actually even the one where I was like, is this shit really going to work? Like, I get the racism and sexism is going to fly with Republican voters, but this is the type of thing that as any type of even semi-developed sixth grader, you're like, maybe I did that, but that kind of feels wrong. So Joe Scarborough has zero moral authority, and he is taking this woman who is the bravest member of Congress, who's already under threat who's already literally has Republican local officials putting her face on a 9/11 poster, and he has the temerity to compare her to Steve King, who has never been condemned by the House, who still is retweeting white nationalists on what seems like an almost weekly basis, and David Duke. Let's play this. This is a hot mic, because Donald Trump, again, is the biggest racist troll in the country. He's the president of the United States. And this was no secret. He launched his campaign on this. This is him in a hot mic with Joe and Mika.
Right, one more segment. One more segment, and then we're good. Thank you for doing this.
Okay. I'm doing it because I said you get great ratings and a raise. Me, I get nothing.
We're getting a real window into your...
Just make us all look good. That's exactly.
Yeah, that makes Joe look really good. You should call and send a respectful email to MSNBC and tell them what you think of a guy who enabled Donald Trump's uninterrupted propaganda when he was running for president, and then occasionally strategically condemn things before having him on again to yuck it up. What you think of him calling a Muslim immigrant woman of color who is speaking on the foreign policy of a sovereign nation state and comparing her to the worst, most objectionable member of Congress and a person that everybody in the United States disavows, except for Donald Trump. Fuck Joe Scarborough, man.
Yeah.
That's fucking disgusting. Fuck these people.
Yep.
That's
And the Democrats are
disgusting.
showing their asses right now if they side with Trump on this versus, a Muslim woman of color
You
who
just
speaks
heard
the
that.
truth.
You just heard that. You should say that again. What's the choice here?
You're siding with Trump or a real progressive who speaks the truth, who speaks truth to power.
You're siding with Trump. An advisor to Trump called her a piece of human excrement. And I've said a million, and I will continue to say this across the board. By the way, with all of these things, there are so many more conversations that could be had in good faith among people who are allies in movements when people make mistakes in their words or actions. And if you wanted to have a conversation with Ilhan Omar, particularly about the 2012 tweet, say, hey, this is a better approach strategically. You might even be unconscious, genuinely making a little bit of a stylistic mistake, whatever. If you actually care about that, you would talk to her privately and she would listen to you and everything would be better. If you're out in public doing this, you are an enemy of progress and you are siding with the worst people in this country.
Yeah. It's like a friend of mine said, Ilhan Omar might be on the 9/11 poster in the Republicans' booths, but she's on the 9/11 poster in the Democrats' hearts.
I mean,
now we're
enough pushback.
We're at an interesting point because it now looks like we might have actually won this battle. They seem to have backed off of the statement. The more important thing, if they want to release that statement, if they have to release that statement to keep Ilhan on the committee, then fine. But that's the only thing I really care about. They shouldn't release.
And
the statement
Elliot
either.
Abrams has said, as of now, he's not making any move to take her off the committee, or not. Elliot Engel.
Okay, I was going to say.
Who is the chair.
It's very magnanimous.
I would imagine Elliot Abrams has tried.
Elliot Engel is the very right-leaning Democratic head of the Foreign Relations Committee. So in this whole week where Ilhan Omar is getting attacked by the worst people in the society, one of the genuinely worst people on the planet sat down with Mehdi Hasan. And what I cannot really understand is why so many just truly horrible human beings sit down with Mehdi Hasan for his head-to-head show on Al Jazeera, because it never ends up working out for them unless they either have a subconscious desire to unequivocally reveal themselves, or if they're Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, that this is really literally just like, I'm fucking loaded and run a global mercenary firm and I just don't care.
What drives you when you kind of come up with these plans to do private security, especially in a lot of these Muslim-majority countries? Because you yourself have referred to the people your men were fighting in Iraq as barbarians who crawled out of the sewer. You say in your memoir, these were the chanting barbarians American troops had been sent to liberate?
Sure. If people that think it's okay to drive a car bomb into the middle of a square, into the middle of a marketplace,
while to attempt to kill an American, and in doing so, they kill dozens and dozens of civilians, absolutely that's barbaric.
Which is true. I think if you refer to terrorists, you call them whatever you want. But you said these were the chanting barbarians American troops had been sent to liberate. You weren't sent to liberate terrorists. Sounds like you're talking about Iraqis.
Sir, look,
It's from your words from your memory.
The decision of Iraq.
Please.
The U.S. decision to go to liberate Iraq from Saddam Hussein, who did a lot more horrid things than we can even speak of here, that was certainly the intent. I certainly had no role in that policy decision.
And here's the second clip about members of Blackwater who have been convicted in U.S. courts of murdering Iraqi civilians.
A U.S. court of law in December prosecuted one of your men for first-degree murder for killing Ahmed Rubai and his mother at Nisour Square.
Yes.
And hold on, let me finish. 3 other men were prosecuted for manslaughter. 4 of your men, murder and manslaughter, in not Iraqi courts, U.S. courts.
That's right. And they prosecuted them 4 times, and they finally got a conviction. The first time he was thrown out for prosecutorial misconduct.
Guilty. They found him guilty.
No. The first time he was thrown out for prosecutorial misconduct. The second time it was overturned. The third time it was a mistrial. The federal government finally got them in a DC jury on the 4th time they tried.
Is a DC jury not a legitimate jury?
I would say a jury of your peers does not really compare to the rest of America. No, that's
okay. Okay, so some juries are legitimate, some not, like so-called judges.
Or so-called juries where he's implying that D.C. would have an unusual amount of black jurors.
Muslims, maybe,
and
too.
Muslims, maybe. Maybe it's just being in a city. So
wow.
That's Eric Prince.
He's
and that's
a fascist.
also, I believe, he is a fascist. These types of contractors are still regularly used in Afghanistan and Iraq. Also, is he the brother-in-law or brother of Betsy DeVos? Brother of Betsy DeVos, who's in charge of our education system. Let's have a little palate cleanser. Sadly enough, I don't know. I've never watched Jeopardy, but Alex Trebek announced that he has very developed cancer, so that's sad. And we wish him well. And here's just an opportunity to watch him. If I knew Jeopardy was like this, maybe I would watch it.
It's called Nerdcore Hip Hop. It's
Nerdcore
Hip Hop. Yes. It's people who identify as nerdy, rapping about the things they love: video games, science fiction, having a hard time meeting romantic partners. You know, it's really catchy and fun.
Losers, in other words.
Well,
what an asshole! That's great.
Owned.
Get well, Alex Trebek. You're calling from a 732 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
rapping about the things they love: video games, science fiction.
You're calling from a 732 area code.
Romantic, you know. It's really catchy.
Yeah, one more time.
Losers, in other words.
Have you caught up, 732?
They're calling from the past.
Sorry. It's too much. I'm not going to wait for the lag time. You're calling from a Skype. 266. I believe yours is a Skype.
Hi, Michael.
Yes. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I am Raj calling from India.
Hi, Raj. What's on your mind?
I do have a couple of criticisms of maybe biases that you guys have on your show.
Okay,
which has to do with both Bernie and AOC.
Okay, sure. Go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about Bernie. The first thing is tax returns. He has not released them, and it's kind of bugging me because I really like Bernie, but he hasn't released them. He said he would do it. He's had 2 years to
all right,
do it.
so I'm just going to say, Raj, all right, noted. This is a normal, let me put it this way. If you asked, I think even people in the studio who do not have much money and don't have he's a person who files personal tax returns with his wife. He'll get them out. There's never been any reporting or any type of indication of anything that there's any there, and I'm sure it will happen. If his tax releases get returned and he secretly runs like an Emirati hedge fund, I will stand corrected.
I
But
don't
what's
believe he
the-
does any
okay,
of that. But
okay,
the thing is,
but let's
he's
let's
had 2 years to do this.
All right,
Use
but
the
can we
same
move to something
excuses
more
from
serious?
the
Because
last,
I just don't take that. That just doesn't matter. What do you have? What's the other one? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be rude. I just want you to use your time effectively.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I appreciate you taking my call in the first
Of course.
place.
All right. Please tell me the other one.
The other thing is with AOC, I do feel that she. Okay, so there was like maybe a couple of months ago, you took a call with someone. Remember the thing about Sam not getting the percentage of the U.S. population, right?
Mm-hmm.
You guys sort of coasted and didn't really address his issues, which has to do with AOC like slipping up in things that really matter. Now, when it came to the Amazon headquarters, she said that the $3 billion was a subsidy that could have been given to other people, to the smaller businesses in New York. But those $3 billion, I know you have addressed it as that, but like she needs to not slip up like that. And because if she had done the math and she had like, it would take a lot of math to do, and people would come out and say that it's incorrect, or they would basically just shoot down everything she said. But if she had done proper math and calculated that 26 billion or however much they promised would actually cost New York State and New York more money than they would actually bring in, I would be cool with that. But she didn't do that. She just said $3 billion. That could have been. That's not $3 billion that New York has to give to people. That's $3 billion that would have been like a discount on the money that Amazon is bringing in. Now, I don't like Amazon. I'm pretty sure it would have gone the same way as Foxconn in Wisconsin. But if she actually could prove that, that would be good.
Okay. Does anybody have anything to add to this?
Not really. I mean, I understand the point about talking about subsidy money that you might get, that companies might save from future lower taxes. And I guess your complaint is that she talked about that as if we already have that in the Treasury now, right? That's your complaint?
Yes, but it's more like, I mean, if she had the thing is, I don't think it's every day that a multi-billion-dollar company is going to bring their headquarters in, and I'm sure they would bring lots of jobs in just the construction of the headquarters, plus the jobs that they're going to bring in would bring in a lot of revenue. Now, I don't know.
Okay, I just really quick. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but literally someone just IM'd. Well, I'm sorry, this isn't new. Oh, sorry, forget it. But Bernie's tax returns from 2016, which were released, and he's going to re-release them. But it's like, yeah, he earned his salary as a senator, as well as Social Security benefits. That's it.
1 year. He released 1 year.
Yeah, and he'll have a little bit more from books. I'm gonna try to be so okay. So let me say this: Bernie stuff, totally irrelevant unless it becomes relevant. So just don't worry about that. That's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. The AOC stuff, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's not hiding it. It doesn't matter. If it comes out, then it comes out. Don't worry. Don't frown. It may never happen. The AOC stuff. Look, she could. I mean, she's doing a huge amount of media. Sometimes everybody who does a huge amount of media makes mistakes. And she probably should, she needs to have some people on her staff tracking a little bit more of this. On the other hand, she's scoring way more than she's not scoring. And I have to say, so right now, her response to Ilhan Omar has been super insufficient. No, I got it. I got the point.
She doesn't have the privilege. She doesn't have the privilege of making mistakes that.
But Raj, but she does. But she does. But that's a self.
They will complain about
here's the problem with your call, though: is you're making a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm not going to indulge in that bullshit. And the response so far to AOC has been they've been trying for as long as she's been on the national scene to either they go straight up crass sexism and say she's stupid, which is demonstrably sexist and false, or they try to make hay on these more narrow, nerdy points, which I got to be honest with you, and this is a really hard thing for liberals in general, because sometimes it's not good because it benefits people on the right. People don't give a fuck.
3 Pinocchios.
They don't care. I don't know a single normal person who has any concern whatsoever about any politician misstating a subsidy number when they're getting the larger story correct. Literally nobody cares, except for people who, like you, who are super tuned in and super smart and engaged, but you're worrying about stuff that the only way they will become stuff is if we make them stuff. So let's not make them stuff.
Well,
Thanks
it
for the
sounds
call.
like he's also making a larger argument that Amazon would have been good for working
I
class
don't think
New
that's what he was
Yorkers.
saying. I think he said I think he wasn't going.
I've
that
seen
far.
people take issue with how AOC does that, right? Like, but I think AOC's right. I don't think she's wrong. Like, it's just about tenses, right? Like, you definitely are carving out billions of dollars that you're not going to be able to use for schools. That, like,
yeah, that's the thing. It's like there is actually a broad aggregate truth in literally if you take $3 million out of the budget,
that makes Amazon moving here less valuable to the city.
Yes. And that also means that somehow that money doesn't go somewhere else. And yes, money's allocated, blah, 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 blah. But this isn't a policy seminar. And frankly, this notion, and it's a very fine line because of course it's a problem for a democracy that people don't have a greater understanding of policy and substance. And there's a huge role in education, of course. But then on the flip side, nobody in a democratic society should have to be taking a Kennedy School seminar to figure out who to vote for. Like, being a simple, clear communicator is what's most important. And I refuse to make either of those things a story because they're not.
It's pedantry.
It's pedantry. You're calling from a 605 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Dylan from South Dakota.
Say again?
And Dylan from South Dakota.
Hey, Dylan, what's on your mind? What's going on?
Well, I would like to direct everybody's anger against the two pedantic calls we've had so far today and direct it towards my state's governor.
Sounds good.
She introduced this week, which is the last week of the state legislative session, two bills. One of them, which would establish a civil penalty for something called riot boosting, which they define as contributing money or encouraging protesters to engage in violence. Now, the Keystone Pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, its last leg of construction is probably going to be here in this state or Montana. And that's probably going to happen either this year or next year. Not really sure how long it's going to take them to start construction. But, she's basically trying to, make a way so, at the last minute, introduce a bill in the state legislature to make it so that way they can fine everybody who donates to, GoFundMes for the protests that are going to happen.
Yep. Well, this is actually, Gene Bajlan and I wrote a piece on this where we compared the Turkish AKP party to the Republican Party in the United States for Jacobin. And one of the things we did was we showed all these state initiatives to just criminalize protest. And those bills are written in horrifying broad ways that could get people it could indemnify, in some cases, indemnify people that ran over protesters with their car.
That's definitely my favorite one.
That's North Dakota.
Legally hitting protesters with your car bill.
We did that.
Yeah, that was North Dakota, too. Don't try to take it
it was the two Dakotas that did that bill.
Jesus Christ.
You know what else I wish? I wish that all of the people who were so freaked out about Elizabeth Warren's, is she Native American? Did she lie about it? I don't know. If half of those people cared half as much about the Keystone Pipeline.
But I don't, because it's really all about just racism. Okay, well, that's disgusting. We need to fight that. It's incredibly dangerous. What's the second thing?
Well, I guess the second bill was just trying to make it so that way the pipeline company would contribute to any extraordinary costs due to policing.
Oh, well, you're talking about
hitting,
bringing in
both
more
ends of trying to fund the fascism.
And that also would include, I'm sure, funding the paramilitary and mercenary groups that come in.
Yeah,
that can be even more suppressive and violent.
Yeah, Tiger Swan.
Tiger Swan was the one that was
the mercenary outfit.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
Just on the face of it, making the pipeline company pay for the law enforcement. I don't know if I like that or not.
Yeah, I was going to say that one seems slightly less objectionable.
Because it might make it hurt more. That might.
Yeah.
Then the more you protest, the more money's coming out of their pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
But there might also be a loophole that allows them to bring in private militia forces.
Sure.
Like some
Well,
of
they're
the
probably
most
already doing that.
abusive police at the protests before were private ones. right?
Yeah, and those things, though, like Tiger Swan, for instance, like those companies need to be outlawed.
Right. Those companies just, Blackwater, Tiger Swan, I mean, those things just need to be
should have
illegal.
been outlawed.
It's a scary
Right,
slide into
of
some
course.
like neo-feudalist hell world
Yeah.
where everyone's got their own private army.
No.
Like, do you really want to be ruled by warlord Peter Thiel?
Yes. All right. Thanks for the call, man. Thanks for a good reminder of reality here.
Yep.
Thank you. Do we have that tweet though? Do we ever get it? The J.R. Bolsonaro one. Oh yeah. So we talked before, and again, please thank Congresswoman Susan Wild, Congressman Ro Khanna, and all of the other 30 signatures of that incredibly important letter. J.R. Bolsonaro is in a fascist government, militarily subservient to the United States, undertaking a wholesale assault on labor unions, on pensions, on indigenous people, on the LGBTQ community, and has a long, robust history of racism and misogyny and everything else. Now, again, it bears repeating, and this is actually an important press coverage thing, because the origins of this go to the removal of Dilma Rousseff from office after she won her second term as president, essentially on grounds of an accounting error, literally. And one of the leaders in that motion is actually, in prison or under investigation. The president that took over, Michel Temer, has been caught on tape talking about bribing people. And then, of course, with zero material evidence, Lula da Silva, who led, the only candidate, he led Jair Bolsonaro by double digits in the polls, was put in jail and barred from communicating and is held in solitary confinement. So democracy was already eroding in a grotesque way because of the coup against Dilma, the imprisonment of Lula, and the rise and threats from the military every step of the way. The U.S. business press, the Wall Street Journal, endorsed Jair Bolsonaro. Canadian businesses were excited. The tweet went up from the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the day he won, saying, well, he's controversial, but this might be great for our timber companies. So that willingness amongst the upper class, the bourgeoisie class in Brazil, and against foreign direct investors from places like the United States. Yes, it's a little embarrassing that Jair Bolsonaro said he might prefer his kid to die than be gay. And it's a little weird that it seems like there's all these connections between his family and mafia cartels and way more violent and serious corruption than anything that was ever proven against the Workers' Party, but let alone even some of the other actual seriously corrupt parties in Brazil. This is a buffoon, clown, gangster government supported every step of the way by Western finance. And he's historically unpopular 2 months into office. And Carnival was a site of huge resistance. There were not only people protesting for freeing Lula and supporting the rights of all, there was also floats of Marielle Franco, the assassinated Afro-Indigenous city councilor and leader who's the cartel that assassinated her is almost certainly connected with the Bolsonaro family through secret bank accounts. The group that won the carnival was Afro-Brazilian and had Marielle placards. So Bolsonaro hates, presumably, Carnival, but at the same time, Carnival is a great tourism attraction and important for the Brazilian economy. So what do you do if you're a stupid fascist with a Twitter account and you can't ban Carnival yet, but you also don't want to embarrass your country and remind everybody of what the Wall Street Journal and the United States regime endorsed in terms of what a jackass and buffoon you are? Well, here is what you do if you're a moron like Jair Bolsonaro. And I should say, this is literally pornography, what we're about to play. I don't know if it might get a strike.
Maybe we just pause it. We don't actually have to play it.
So we don't have to play it. He literally tweets out, presumably this was shot during Carnival, but it is part, according to the reporting that I understand, it's a gay pornography video of a guy peeing on another dude.
It's not that pornographic. It's just a little golden shower between friends.
No, I don't think it's between friends. I think they're actually literally shooting a video. I think they're reporting. I think Greenwald
like
indicated,
a gonzo porn at Carnival.
I think that's what it is.
Ah, Oh, nice.
So he took, and of course, like, yeah, people are dancing up on each other and all sorts of stuff, but he took something that most likely is literally a staged video. A production outside of Carnival. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but that's my understanding. And he wrote, and we're translating, the translation service on Twitter is not great, but you get the gist of it. I don't feel comfortable showing it, but we have to expose the truth to the population, knowing and always taking their priorities. This is what has turned many street blocks in Brazilian Carnival. Comment and remove your confusions.
Let's see a Brazil national anthem.
And it's
yes, this is
guy
from the
just,
official account.
Taking a little tinkle.
Taking a little twinkle. Then there was a follow-up tweet where J.R. Bolsonaro apparently asked what a golden shower was in response to being mocked. And there was a golden shower account that popped up and asked who J.R. Bolsonaro was. This is who Donald Trump is, of course, tight at the hip with. He's going to be making a state visit to the Trump administration soon. Should be greeted with a huge amount of protests.
Should be greeted with a huge amount of golden showers.
And then, of course, this is also a guy who was praised by, as Dave Rubin calls him,
Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro.
So Dave Rubin takes this a story, and I don't know this story. Apparently, it's from, and of course, it's Rubin, so I cannot take it at face value,
right?
By definition. But apparently, Dave Rubin is saying that there's a school in Birmingham, Alabama, which drew its lessons on LGBT acceptance because 400 Muslim parents petitioned against it. This is not the way forward. Now, I could tell you with almost complete certainty that if there was a coalition of religiously conservative parents, it absolutely could have included Muslims who were wrong and opposed teaching LGBT acceptance. I really doubt that in Alabama, a solely Muslim-fueled movement did that job on their own. I'm going to guess that there were other people in that movement, like, I don't know, potentially the Christian community. And if there are any followers of the Ben Shapiro-style Jewish community, Dave's friend who won't bake him a cake, I'm assuming they'd be part of it too. So I'm just going to stipulate here that I have no doubt that right-wing Muslims could be part, and are part, of course, of bigotry against LGBT people. But the way Dave is framing this, like everything else that comes out of his mouth, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't even go that he's lying. I'm just sure he saw a top line and didn't research it.
He could be lying.
Oh, he could.
Well, why isn't his reaction that these 400 Muslim Alabaman parents just want to get rid of the SJW nonsense in schools?
This is, of course, the great point, and I don't know if we still have that sound, but this is, of course, the motherlode of rad ideas on Twitter says this is the same guy who praised Bolsonaro for quote unquote getting rid of the SJW stuff and schools. So which is it, Dave?
Well, that's the problem when you hate all identities that aren't your own equally.
Wait, but this is Dave. Maybe he's had a change of heart. Maybe this is him talking about Alabama being more respected inside the broader United States and the SJW stuff in schools. This is Dave Rubin.
Your opinion on Brazilian Prime Minister Bolsonaro regarding, there's a lot of things moving here, deforestation of the rainforest. P.S. I'm a Christian. I'd bake you a cake, though. I don't know enough about him, but it sounds like he really hates Marxism, and he's really pushing Brazil to become more of a world leader, and that he actually is for capitalism, and he's trying to get some of the SJW stuff out of the schools. I just saw a tweet by him a day or two ago. So,
I would imagine that it's very possible that some of those Muslim parents who were involved in that despicable effort in Alabama, if this is even true, are small business owners. They might like capitalism quite a bit.
It seems as if their race is maybe the only thing Dave Rubin has a problem with.
Yeah, it seems as if their outfits and their race, that might be the distinguishing issue here.
Because they're also trying to get the SJW stuff out of schools, Dave.
In fact, if you go to places like Saudi Arabia, I could tell you there's no SJW bullshit in those schools.
These people, they have a very tortured relationship with right-wing Muslims. Because on the one hand, they hate them because they're Muslims. Also, I think they're a little bit jealous that they've maybe made more strides in making their religion political.
Theocracy, yeah.
Yeah. Right. And on the other hand, they dislike them because they're Muslims, but they like them because they are right-wing theocrats, right? So they can't really figure it out, but they like to slot them in along with LGBT people when it suits them. Like, this is all this crazy cultural Marxism shit. Figure it out, guys.
Well, I agree with you, and I would say that this is actually a helpful. So I have plenty of problems with new atheism, and I'll continue to say I just don't like broad, bigoted, categorical statements about any group of religious people because it's inaccurate and ahistorical. But this is the interesting difference between the new atheist stuff that bled into the IDW, because like Richard Dawkins, who's totally a prick about Muslims and obviously has weird issues there, he, though, still has a broadly just anti-religious stance, and that's his kind of standby. But the element of the new atheism that was really more about reactions to things like immigration and globalization and those types of issues, they now are involved in a movement where, two of the leading lights of it are religious. I mean, one, Ben Shapiro is a overt right-wing religious person, and Jordan Peterson is at the very least a massive religious apologist. And then of course Empty Head Rubin has gone from supping at the cup of Sam Harris worship to I don't think he's publicly embraced God yet, but he's tweeting out abortion conspiracy videos. So this is where it goes. It's almost like
their stated principles were totally disingenuous from the beginning.
Almost like that. Disco Stew.
Oh yeah, sorry. Just to cover our bases, that might have been Birmingham, UK. In which case, the point about SJW nonsense in schools still stands.
Still stands. No, you know what? Then we're okay. Great. I stand corrected. If it's in the Birmingham in the UK, it absolutely could have been spearheaded by Muslims, and it's a huge problem in the UK that there is basically hugely religious autonomous schools that can enforce policies like that. And it's a huge problem in all communities, including the Muslim one in the UK. And it's wrong, and it should be discarded. And part of how you would discard it would be by injecting some SJW stuff into the British public schools, as it should be restored in the Brazilian public schools.
Yeah, and integrating immigrants into society instead of treating them like second-class citizens.
Exactly. Disco Stew, pretty weak response to Raj's call. No need to be a dick. Well, I don't really think I was being a dick. Michael really gives you the impression that you can't handle any Bernie's criticism. Some may be legit. If HRC wouldn't release her taxes, you would have been all over it. Just say, yeah, I should do that and move on. Well, first of all,
that's not true.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, okay, so even then, if you go back to my response to things like her emails, I didn't give a fuck, including about all of the WikiLeaks emails that came out that so many people thought were so damning. Mostly were frankly just prosaic campaign bullshit. So
I found some of them quite charming.
Some of them were kind of charming, but like so you're wrong on the merits. On the other hand, again, I'm sorry, we got to get back to reality here. Bernie Sanders is a senator and he has book contracts. Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton made tens of millions of dollars running a global nonprofit that brought a huge amount of money in from corporations, from foreign governments. They got paid millions of dollars a pop for speeches. So their finances are way more complicated and would raise more questions by definition. And that being said, I didn't even dwell on that in the first place. So you're just wrong. And look, whatever. You're being, that's a pedantic, and I'll be a dick about that. I am. That's a bad take. I am too.
We can take criticism of Bernie if it's legitimate, and that was dumb.
We do legitimate criticisms.
I
of
have
Bernie.
plenty of legitimate left criticisms of Bernie. That wasn't it. And also, my left criticisms have no bearing on whether or not he's still the best viable candidate running right now.
I am not going to feed dumb media manufactured narratives. I didn't even do it with Hillary Clinton, who I fiercely opposed in that primary, let alone Bernie Sanders.
Can we spend 20 minutes on Tad Devine?
Exactly. Actually, I'd prefer to spend some time on this. John Bolton was speaking with Jake Tapper. And look, this is so interesting because this whole effort towards this Venezuela coup and threats of invasion. First of all, look at Trudeau and the pseudo woke scandal engulfed Canadian government. Trudeau signed up on efforts at regime change in Venezuela, but has been I believe, photographed with the Haitian president, who organic, non-outside engineered interests are demanding he be removed. Haiti has one of the most important social movements happening in the world today right now. Go to the TMBS channel and watch the history of it with France Francois. And again, there's organic opposition inside Venezuela, and the Venezuelan government has absolutely committed abuses. There's no doubt. Ken Silverstein just wrote a really good report there from the New Republic. He's like, look, made plenty of mistakes. On the other hand, the talk of crisis is manufactured and made up. And most Venezuelans, even if they oppose Maduro, do not want a U.S. engineered regime change. This should not be that complicated to figure out. The Trudeau, the resistance people, the people who are so naive that somehow they're able to rightly say that Donald Trump is a racist monster who rips children out of their parents' arms, all of a sudden, oh, no, but no, in Venezuela, I mean, obviously that would be the one case where, of course, there's genuine human concern here. And as evidenced by the fact that his point person is literally a ghoul going back to the 1980s who has done spin and cover for every type of death squad and mass murder imaginable in Latin America, not to mention also tremendously harmful work in the Middle East. Of course, I'm talking about Elliot Abrams. At least this administration, Amber Lee Frost had a great piece about why leftists don't like the New York Times, but we like the Financial Times. And one of the things she said was, the New York Times doesn't know that we're in a fight. Financial Times is on, I'm paraphrasing her, the Financial Times, they're on the different side of it, but at least they know we're in conflict here. So don't listen to the nonsense, Bill and Hillary Clinton tweeting out, oh, but it's time for the Venezuelan people and blah, 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 all this nonsense. This is John Bolton telling you exactly what is going on with U.S. policy in Venezuela.
Good to hear. But do you not see that the United States' support for other brutal dictators around the world undermines the credibility of the argument you're making?
No, I don't think it does. I think it's separate. And I think, look, in this administration, we're not afraid to use the phrase Monroe Doctrine. This is a country in our hemisphere. It's been the objective of American presidents going back to Ronald Reagan to have a completely democratic hemisphere.
There you go.
Wow. I think the word he was actually looking for was capitalist hemisphere.
Well, and also, the Tapper sure is right to point out the hypocrisy, but the appropriate follow-up question, which Tapper did not ask, is what about literally, again, over 49 coups, death squads. Your point person on Venezuela was lied to Congress about Iran-Contra, was involved in covering up some of the worst massacres in human history in El Salvador, a genocide in Nicaragua. How does that fit? But Bolton, he said it. I mean, the first point was the important point. This is the Monroe Doctrine. It's our regional imperial hegemony. That's what this is about. And that's why, again, in a broader conversation, of course there should be a serious analysis of Venezuela. And of course anybody who tells you that there's no problems there and there's no corruption, there's no abuses is either being tremendously naive or hugely ideological or lying. But at the same time, you need to recognize the strategic context of what a U.S. intervention is. This is a U.S. government that even under Obama was already backing a coup in Honduras that removed a moderate Manuel Zelaya that culminated in the assassination of Berta Cárdenas in 2015 by paramilitaries in a Honduran far-right government backed by us. This is a government that participated and backed the lawfare that made Lula a conciliatory social democrat who managed to deliver huge things for the Brazilian people while trying to strike deals with the oligarchs in his country and Western capital. But importantly, I do think refused to denationalize vital oil reserves. And I think that is where the relationship broke down. So be real, let alone when you're talking about Trump, who, again, as all resistance people constantly rightly say, is a racist monster who has no human concern for anybody. So the notion that all of a sudden it's like Trump it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't care, but when it comes to Venezuela, there's a lot of tens there. I really care about their well-being. If he cared about their well-being, incidentally, why is he deporting so many Venezuelans back to this hellhole? I mean, you think Venezuela is not part of this white supremacist war on people of color from Donald Trump's ICE regime? I mean, God, it's like in another context, I'll quote Ehud Olmert, like, well, you're being naive.
Well, I think this is the year when people have to say the quiet parts out loud, and they have to say what they really mean and what they really believe about things. And this is another one of those instances where you can't be a fence sitter. There are two choices. There's Guaido, a representative of neoliberalism and the ruling class that's going to impose further suffering, much worse than the Venezuelan people have seen so far. And there's Maduro, which is the other choice, which every leftist that I've spoken to from Venezuela has some form of critical support for Maduro because he's better than the alternative.
Well, and also, again, even I agree with that, and lift sanctions. I mean, that's the other thing, too, is if you wanted an organic process where you could allow for a possibility of a left opposition to emerge without being suppressed, as it has been inside the Bolivarian movement by Maduro, you would lift sanctions, which is the primary cause. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a huge amount of corruption and mismanagement in the Venezuelan government, but the sanctions are overwhelming. You could actually contribute to an open society in Venezuela and the emergence of movements that are still democratic and autonomous inside this left formation.
Yeah, power to the communes.
Which could win, right. And that could actually be an alternative power source. But of course, it's literally the last thing that the United States government or even, of course, obviously, again, not good faith people in Venezuela who are, and I know, I know people who's like, no, they don't support the opposition, but they don't support Maduro because things are not good, right? Fine. But they don't support U.S. intervention and they don't support Guaido, period. But, it goes without saying that there's the oligarchs and U.S. foreign policy do not want a democratic opposition to restore the Bolivarian movement. They want a right-wing pliant-client state where all of the problems will get even worse. I mean, you think that a right-wing Venezuelan U.S.-backed government is going to be, we should clean up the cartel stuff. Yeah. U.S. foreign policy in Latin America is known for cracking down on military abuses and drug trafficking. That's something you'll learn if you study U.S. history in Venezuela. So I think, the best case is to have a critical engagement and understand the Bolivarian movement and drill into Venezuela and think critically about it. But honestly, you could just, if you want to, you could just save yourself some time and say, I oppose a coup and an invasion, period. There's actually nothing more on a functional political level that you have to do.
Yep.
Because that's the bottom line right now.
This is another area where Bernie Sanders is far and away the best candidate for president.
And Tulsi Gabbard's done the right noises on this too.
Sure.
In this case, I got to give her
He understands this stuff. He stands against meddling in Latin American countries. He knows the history. And, a lot of the other candidates don't really have a foreign policy. And if you don't have a foreign policy, guess what your foreign policy in office is going to be? 100%. It's going to be the bipartisan neocon consensus that has already done so much damage to the world.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's going to be all those liberal foreign policy people who were surprised at the negative reaction Elliot Abrams got.
Yeah, it's just like, I know Elliot Abrams. We have coffee together.
He's nice.
He's
How
a nice
dare you?
man. Oh, he covered up a massacre where they literally drank children's blood.
It was
the Cold War.
It was remarkable seeing the people who have built followings of liberal left people, but they're part of the blob, completely caught off guard that people might have issues with Elliot Abrams. That's as terrifying as anything I've saw this year.
There is such a thing as cognitive capture. It isn't all material. There's also genuinely, as Sam Harris would say, there's bad beliefs. You're calling and really bad incestuous social networks. You're calling from a 478 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Well, somebody at the top of the show said the words class warfare. So like a magical fairy. I'm here. It's Jeff from Georgia, Michael.
Jeff from Georgia. What's going on, brother? What's on your mind?
Hey, man, not much. I know it's late today, so I'll just try to be short and sweet because I just want to try to make a quick little point that kind of ties together what's happening with Representative Omar in Israel and with Bernie Sanders. Just to these people, the audience, should know that her detractors, they don't actually care about either Israel as a nation, as Sam has explained many times, the path that they're on. And they don't care about American Jewry.
Yep.
And people who come at Bernie Sanders with criticisms of related to his identity as a white man, yes, also as a Jewish man, I recognize that. But they paint him as an old white man. They are similarly unconcerned with the welfare of massive amounts of women, of people of color. They actually don't care about that kind of thing. And people need to get used to that because they're not going to stop. 2020 is here. It's going to go on for 2 more years. I guarantee it. They're never going to stop weaponizing identity, whether it's Jewish identity or identity as a black person or identity as a woman, in order to divide leftists. We have a once-in-a-lifetime chance, I think, to really turn this country around. I just want people to be aware and not shy away from the fight.
I 100%
really,
agree
it's
with
a fight
you,
that
Jeff.
we're going to have, and now's the time to have it before the Democratic primary. Thanks for taking my call, Mike.
Thanks,
Y'all
Jeff.
have a good now.
100%.
I'm going to take his.
Oh, sorry.
Can we get a breaking news?
Yes. Where is the breaking news? I'm sorry. Hold on one second. No, honestly, this is really weird.
And you, sir?
There it is.
Sherrod Brown is not running for president.
Good.
Get the fuck out of here.
Get the fuck out of here. No, it's actually there was a good piece in the New Republic about like how just like the narcissism of like okay, John Hickenlooper obviously like just totally sucks and couldn't be more whatever and just totally unnecessary. But like he polls the best against Cory Gardner to pick up a Colorado Senate seat. And look, a conservative, democratic, technocratic, whatever is not my first choice, but I'm, it's like I want that Senate seat flipped. And if he's the best person to do that, then I want him to run. I want him to win. Beto O'Rourke, I maintain. He is my favorite neoliberal. Him and Obama are like my neoliberal guys. And he's polling well against John Cornyn, who literally tweeted a fucking Mussolini quote. And just like watching, Jeff Merkley and now Sherrod Brown be like, you know what? Like, there are other jobs here. And there isn't like, look, let's just be blunt. Other candidates, there's compelling demographic and generational cases as to why they're running. And then in Bernie's case, there's like a compelling, we need to actually save the world case he's running. Like, not everybody needs to run for president. Like,
I could turn this Senate seat blue that's been red for a long time, or I could lose the presidential campaign to Trump.
I mean, honestly, like
out in South Carolina.
I mean, the thing with like, that is the other really crazy thing about like a Hickenlooper is it's like, I understand why Beto, like, because he's got 1 million people saying to him, like, dude, do this. And he'll raise a ton of money and I don't think it's going to happen, but there is some like organic constituent part. Hickenlooper, it's like you can help the country and serve honorably in the U.S. Senate, or you can get like 0.5% of the vote and drop out after Iowa and give some like dumb interviews like he did about Mitch McConnell, where you show that you have no understanding of how modern politics
He's just not
work.
serious. He just wants to make some more money. He knows that this is a good marketing opportunity for him and improve his brand, which is what this has become ultimately for a lot of these people.
Well, I think that's actually why we need to punish people like Hickenlooper, because it should not improve his brand.
And someone like Sherrod Brown, who's been in the Senate for however long, knows that if I leave this seat, it's absolutely going to go red. I might as well hold on to it as long
He's
as I
a
can.
good senator from Ohio. He's a good labor senator. We need him.
I won a $50 bet because he's not running.
Who did you bet against on
I
that?
bet against a friend.
Oh, nice. Sam still owes me about
Cha-ching.
Sanders. Shit. Sam's totally ducking that.
Oh, yeah. What the hell?
Yeah, Sam's like, I don't think Bernie's going to run. And I said, I think Bernie's going to run. And he was like, I don't, because I think he's watching Warren. And and I was like, he's going to run.
He would have been.
Now he's not even.
He would have been
blowing past it.
murked by his own fans had he refused to run.
No, I think that's
We
true.
would have, what did Amber Frost say? Shove your hand up his ass and use him like a ventriloquist dummy.
Sure. All right, I'll read this IM because I just caught it, and this guy is trying to take us to task, and it will be the final IM of the day, and then maybe, should we do one more clip, or do we have enough clips? Okay. After Donald Trump is the death of accuracy. There's a huge difference between Europe, Canada, and Australia on one hand, the USSR, Maoist China, North Korea on the other. Yes, I don't think anybody would debate that. I'm assuming everybody in the room is on the same page so far. There is a huge difference between Australia and North Korea. Okay. The distinction matters a lot. George Orwell and Hitchens were actual Democrats. I don't know why you want to use Hitchens. George Orwell, and this is Chomsky, by the way, which I'm not sure this should be your IM name. George Orwell and Hitchens were actual democratic socialists. The democratic socialists would want to nationalize the auto industry, Bernie is just your standard New Deal Democrat who wants to tax the rich, reduce the army, and wants living wage and Medicare for all. We need all Republican independent voters in the general election. That's why it matters. Can you address this? Well, actually, I'm sorry. This part is irrelevant. I already did address that. They're going to level that charge against anybody, and so that is what it is. Also, this was the part that I wanted to give an airing, and I don't know, this is very annoying formulation. Can you guys be socialists without being useful idiots for the murderous Maduro regime? You can criticize the government while at the same time supporting Bernie's... Okay, so you're about to get something dangerously, substantively wrong here I'm about to read. But your first couple sentences are wrong, substantively and factually. I have said I said at the heart of the drumbeat for coup and invasion, I top-lined a report in the New York Times about Maduro using paramilitaries for extrajudicial killings. You can go look that up a couple weeks ago in the Majority Report. And my arc of my coverage, if you go back to conversations with Ava Gollinger like a year ago, definitely included very serious critiques of the Venezuelan government. You don't center that when you're on the verge of a coup or invasion, because that's politics, and that's why we aren't just like nerd bots here. There's some strategic analysis about focus. But in every single conversation, look, I'm going to defend Chavez. I'm going to defend the Bolivarian movement in many ways. And I've never shied away from criticizing Maduro and the current government. And even Nathan Robinson, again, he wouldn't center it now, but he wrote a piece about a year ago where he's like, if anything, you could argue Venezuela's on the right. I wouldn't. I would say it's a left populist project. Anyways, so you're wrong. But now you're getting substantively wrong. You can criticize the U.S. government while at the same time supporting Bernie's tweets telling Maduro to let aid into the people. Would you have... Okay.
Dude.
So this is where you're... Okay. So that's just so naive. This is what I'm talking about before.
Can you not be a useful idiot for capitalist imperialism?
You know what? I can't. A part of me wants to elaborate how stupid that perspective is, but I mean, honestly, Jamie just nailed it. Like, you're talking about a convoy that has actually turned into an international embarrassment that literally everybody outside of the Venezuelan opposition of Guaido, I don't even want to use opposition that way because there's opposition that is not Guaido, but outside of this Guaido clique and U.S. foreign policy, even the Brazilians were a little bit concerned about it because they're like, whoa, we're not actually going to get into a ground invasion of Venezuela, guys. And the Colombians are, a very far-right government. They were enlisted by it. So what that actually would be a precursor to greater U.S. interference. Also, a massive undermining of legitimate food aid projects. You might recall, and I'm sorry to say from your IMs, I'm assuming you don't, there was a major operation that was part of what got bin Laden. And I'll give you one that some people don't like, but maybe you would like. I don't have a problem with what we did to Osama bin Laden. I don't. Sorry. I don't. Whatever. What I do have a major, major problem with was that the CIA set up a fake vaccination program as part of an effort to basically collect DNA to properly identify who was in the compound. The blowback and upshot of that lie is a physical danger to health workers, particularly in South Asia and in Pakistan, and a total undermining in places as far away as Nigeria of legitimate and actual efforts to vaccinate people. So this scam convoy was not only a obvious and transparent, and everybody except for like apparently you, because I'm telling you, like Chris Murphy tweeted about this thing, dude. Okay. And I like Chris Murphy, but I wouldn't put Chris Murphy on the cutting edge of radical critique. Okay. Everybody understood that. And more broadly, what happens when there's a legitimate aid effort of a legitimate aid worker undertaken by the State Department? And now any autocrat in the world can say, oh, well, look at what they were doing in Venezuela. So actually the blowback of it undermines global relief efforts writ large. So dumb take.
It's not controversial that USAID is just a front for the CIA. They have been condemned by those propagandistic and biased bodies known as the UN and the Red Cross as being politically compromised.
They are, but I'm telling you, even projects USAID that are better and more legit, because these are complex organizations like any other, the nakedness of that effort undermines even where they're doing legitimate work and
yeah,
people
that's why the
and
Red
people
Cross
with
doesn't
real
like
jobs.
them.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm saying including USAID itself. So, and then the other questions: would you have supported the Stalin during the Holodomor in Ukraine, or Mao during the 3 years of the Great Famine? And I'm going to say in both cases, no.
Would you have supported the U.S. South during Jim Crow?
Yeah.
Like, can you read the beginning of that email off?
Can you guys can be socialists without being useful idiots for murderous Maduro regime.
Where's the stuff about the Maoist China and that stuff? Because to characterize China as Maoist China,
would you have supported Stalin during the Holodomor in Ukraine or Mao during the 3 years of Great Famine when they turned away international aid and millions died of hunger?
I'm an anarcho-communist. What do you think my position is on Stalin?
Yeah,
he only killed like 1 million of us.
Yeah, I guess I just think it's ridiculous.
It's also just frankly too like, okay, again, let's have a slightly reality-based conversation here. So I'll even go it on right-wing terms. I am a critic of Lee Kuan Yew and the Singaporean system, and they definitely are repressive and abusive of people's rights. And there has never been any reporting and any legitimate claim that they did anything on the scale of what Pinochet did in Chile. So even to draw like that kind of direct, like to say Maduro, who absolutely violates human rights and abuses absolutely to exist, and there are, I'm sure, some shortages, though that's been exaggerated. Clearly, independent reporting does show that for sure. But you're going to compare that to millions of people dying in the Great Leap Forward or any number of Stalin's crimes? That is
emotional blackmail.
And historically delusional to the point of being offensive.
You got to deal with the options on the table, right? Because there was a legitimate left resistance to Stalin at various points in time. So, of course, I would side with them in that instance. If the choice is on the table here were authoritarian sort of social democrat Maduro on the one hand and left resistance from the communes on the other, I would side with the communes. But those aren't the options here.
All right. Final I am of the day. I apologize. Cannot get to any more calls, but I caught that I am, and it annoyed me.
That's a good segment.
And it was a good segment. I just don't, I actually really hope people can read Ben Burgess's book and watch his videos and watch our conversation with him, because he really does actually he even taught us, what was it? It was like the false analogy fallacy. Like you just see this stuff all the time. And it's like, first of all, yes, it's emotional blackmail. And it's also just like, it's profoundly sloppy thinking.
It's profoundly annoying too.
And profoundly
It's like
annoying.
the Ahmadinejad Hitler comparisons. Like Iran's not Nazi Germany.
It is not. And it also robs from the ability to say, 1 minute, Ahmadinejad was so comically over-vilified and the fundamental nature of the Iranian government was so distorted that today the overcorrection of irony people like me is like, this guy still actively suppressed the Green Movement. The Mousavi's are still in jail, right? Like Those are actually serious abuses, not to mention the treatment of gay and lesbian people and the Baha'is and so on. When you go to such extravagant nonsense, you take back from an ability to have a clear-headed critique based in reality. Venezuela or anywhere else. All right, final IM of the day. CZ, hello MR crew. Regarding the caller yesterday who asked why we can't be more tolerant of homophobia in religion, I just want to say that as a married gay woman, there is a big difference between your religion not allowing a different branch of Judaism at your wedding and refusing to attend a same-sex wedding because your religion teaches that gay people are inherently despicable and less than human. Tolerance of intolerance is ridiculous and renders the whole definition of tolerance meaningless. That is the final IM of the day. We are back tomorrow.
I take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know